we'll see how things go here. Let me have that paper. I'll give that to Joy.
Okay, what?
That's what, hold on. We're gonna wait until-
Joy, do you think I should pull up the board docs now? Do you think I should pull up the board docs now?
I'd like to call to order the work session from March 1st, 2022. Dr. Cohen, would you please say the Pledge of Allegiance?
Good evening. So good evening, Lower Moreland Township School District community. My name is Dr. Scott Davidheiser, Superintendent of Schools, and thank you for attending this evening's meeting of the Board of School Directors. Again, I would like to remind our board and members of the public this meeting is being live streamed on our district YouTube channel, and that a recording of the meeting will be posted on our school board website within 48 hours following this meeting. I would like to remind our board members and members of the public joining us this evening, welcome our board members and members of the public joining us this evening. To our board members, please be reminded that for sound purposes, you must turn on your microphone by tapping the touchpad and speak directly into it for the sound to be audible, not only for our in-person community members here in the auditorium, but also for anyone listening to the live stream. After speaking, please also mute your microphone by once again pressing on the touchpad. Ms. Mayfield, would you please take the roll call of the board?
Mrs. Baker? Mrs. Baker?
Present.
Mr. Berardi? Dr. Butler?
Present.
Ms. Cannon?
Here.
Dr. Cohen?
Present.
Mr. Geiger?
Present.
Dr. Lee?
Present.
Mrs. Natter?
Present.
Mr. Steinberg? Dr. Davidheiser, everyone is present.
Great, thank you. I'll take the roll call of the cabinet members and our administrators who will also be participating. Mrs. Galdo.
Present.
Mrs. Drennan.
Present.
Mr. McGuinn.
Here.
Mr. Giordano.
Present.
Dr. Hilt. Dr. Hilt is not here. Mr. Miles. Mr. Miles is present. Ms. Dilks. Ms. Dilks is not present at the moment. I know she will be here shortly. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole is present, so thank you. So this evening, go ahead, why don't you do that?
I'd like to inform the public that the board met in executive session for 2.5 hours on February 24th to discuss legal matters.
So to begin our presentations this evening, we do not have Mr. James Lynch here. However, we have the esteemed Colin Case from Dewey Engineering. And Ashley, can you remind me of your last name again? Pugliese, who are here to present and give you the monthly update of the high school project.
Hello, everyone. Yes, Jamie. I think it's on. Yeah, you guys can hear me okay. Here we go. So hello, everyone. Jamie Lynch could not join us tonight. I am Colin Case. I am a senior project manager for Dewey Engineering. I'm actually out here from time to time helping out Ashley and Jamie oversee the project. I see more of the macro standpoint, so this is a perfect time for me to come out here and give you guys kind of a zoomed out update of where we're at with the project. So I think Jamie started off the last meeting with some good news. He said no new change orders. So that will be the same for this meeting. So no surprises as far as this update. And that is the same for the schedule as well. The schedule is still tracking exactly how it did last month. We've been really lucky. We've had some good weather. We've had a relatively quiet winter as far as snowstorms and winter weather. The cold temperatures have been a challenge, but we're using cold weather heating for the concrete retaining walls, and all in all, we're still able to push forward despite the cold temperatures. I was just doing some research as far as the weather forecast for the next 2 weeks, and it looks like I've seen a 70-degree day. So it looks like we're on our way towards springtime, and we're excited to get some warm weather out there. The guys are getting sick of the heated and insulated jackets, so maybe you'll see some short sleeves in the coming weeks. As far as an update for construction, we've been focusing a lot on these giant retaining walls that you guys see from the street. And it's really starting to take shape as far as the structure of the building. I'm sure a lot of you guys use that Wawa down on the corner of Red Line. You know, when you come up in the morning and the sun's out and you look up that hill, the building has quite the presence. It's very impressive. You know, I'm not out here too often. I come out once a week, so I really see the progress that gets made. Sometimes when you're out here every day, you see it, and it's like, are they moving? What's going on? But when you come out once a week, it's like, wow, they're really doing well as far as progress, especially in the wintertime. So we do have some of the larger retaining walls going in. Some of the key aspects for foundations of these projects is getting these retaining walls for the multi-story building. There's a lot going on with it. It's not setting up forms. There's quite a bit of rebar in these walls, as you guys can see, and there's a lot of quality control going on. And we usually go with a belt and suspenders approach where we have multiple inspectors looking at these before they get poured, including us. You have township code officials, third-party testing agents. There's a lot of eyes on these walls before you do any type of concrete pours. And they're coming along well. Like I said, it's difficult with the cold, but we take advantage of the warmer days, and it's coming along quite nice. Now, like I said, quite the street presence this project has, man. When you look up that hill, it is very impressive. At some point, you won't see these beautiful retaining walls again. They'll be buried inside the building. But as you can see, foundations are going in on the outside, and hopefully this spring we'll start backfilling some of these walls. And that will allow us to prepare for structural steel. I think in the last update, Jamie mentioned that we're looking for an early April arrival for structural steel. We're hoping maybe in our next GC schedule update that might be a late March arrival. So things are moving well. We're excited to get steel going up. Usually with these projects, they seem like they're moving slow because there's a lot going on underground. But once you get that steel superstructure up, you really see the skeleton of the building coming together. Let me keep on going here. Ashley's been working with the contractors, getting some of the foundation masonry together. This will end up being backfilled as well, and this is going to allow us to be prepared for when steel stair towers begin, as well as the elevator shafts. Jamie gave you guys a nice update on the elevator shaft and how complex they are to put together. There's a lot of work that goes into those, and that's the same for this project. There's a lot of coordination between the general contractor and electrical contractor, and that's the same for this job. So we're kind of having constant weekly meetings as far as getting ready for those elevators, and we're going to be prepared for when the time comes. We also had some good news this week. Man, I keep hitting the wrong button here. So we had some good news this week. You guys were fortunate. You had PICO on site. If anybody's familiar with PICO, they don't do anything fast, especially during these times with delays and labor issues going around for everybody. So PICO was actually out. They were able to energize the new service up to the transformer, and the electrical contractor has been working on the duct bank. This is going to set you guys up for when the building's enclosed and we have a roof on the job for the switchgear to be installed and be energized. So that's really good progress. It's another big ticket item checked off the list from PICO. Now, also going on the day-to-day, and this is something you guys probably don't actually see out here, and this is one of the more difficult things to do from a contractor and trade standpoint. They're putting in the underground plumbing. So if you guys are out there, you might see some of these white PVC pipes sticking out of the ground, and you're wondering, man, I wonder what those are for. Well, any one of those pipes could be a sink, could be a drain, could be a clean out, and these go in usually after foundations because they're able to pull a measurement off the wall, figure out where a sink goes, and they lay that out, and it's impressive. Once you go from here in the slabs board, they'll start putting metal stud walls in, and they'll almost hit their mark within a half an inch of where that sink is supposed to be. And it's very important because once the slab's on there, they can't easily go back in there to move a pipe around. So they're making some good progress, and pretty soon you'll start seeing some electrical conduit following the PVC from the plumber. Behind the scenes, materials are arriving daily. Steel columns and beams are in production, and we should see those beginning in April for sure, if not late March. It looks like the weather's going to cooperate, and hopefully we can get steel a little early. That'll certainly do well as far as for the construction schedule. In addition to that, contractors are continuing to order materials and have things delivered to the site as well as stored off-site. I know Jamie had some conversations with you guys last time explaining the stored materials. They are very important to keep the job progressing well, especially in the times that we're having right now with material shortages. So things are starting to come in. It's nice when you see things arrive on site, and it's always good when you see truckloads of materials coming in, no matter what it is. And this is just a snapshot of the schedule. This is the exact schedule shown at the last meeting. There hasn't been any changes. We're hoping to evaluate how well the GC does when steel shows up. Hopefully we can gain some time back for you guys, but as of now, it's still looking for a December finish. And with that said, hopefully I didn't go too quick here. If you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer some for you guys.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
What does that mean when you energize a transformer?
So that means that there is power from the electrical pole at the street, which was installed in the last update, up to the transformer itself. So once that transformer is energized, the power stops there. Then we can pull the rest of the wire into the building to the switchgear, and then it can be turned on from the transformer to the building. And the electrical contractor can do that. We don't need to wait for PICO to come and do that. So it's important.
Thank you.
Yep.
And as Colin mentioned, one of the biggest challenges in projects like that are working with energy or utility providers. We've had go-arounds with PICO. We've certainly had go-arounds with Aqua, trying to get them on the same page that we want to be on, trying to adhere to our schedule versus their schedule. And I know the contractors and Dewey and folks from KCBA have been working very hard to make sure that they sync up together, because we certainly don't want to be waiting for an Aqua, for example, to come on site when we're ready to keep moving. So kudos to all of our professionals working on the job, and hopefully that will continue.
And before I jump off here, I did want to mention something very important on this job. I'm not here quite often. You guys probably don't see me too much. You see Mr. Lynch a lot and Ashley. But one thing I noticed on this project, which is great to see from the four-prime contractors and the design team, as well as the construction management and the school district, the team is really starting to come together. When you're doing a project this size, to this magnitude and how complex it is, it's good to have a team with problem solvers rather than creators. And that's certainly what we have here. With the challenges with the permit, as well as the complexity of the retaining walls that we have going on in this job and the MPDS itself, it's been a great team. and we hope to continue that through the rest of the job. It's really good to see. You can have jobs go the other way, it gets a little ugly. This one's going really well. I get excited to come to job meetings for this one because everybody does get along.
I have a question about the steel.
Yes.
It's my understanding that we locked in the commodity price so that if steel does rise for some reason, we're safe. You're not going to come back to us and say, oh, guess what? We have, to add to the project because of the raw materials. That's not going to happen, correct?
That's correct, yes. In the front end documents of the construction contracts, there is a note in there as far as escalation, which includes commodity increases, as you said, and the contractors are not entitled to any compensation for increases with something like that, exactly. So even if we're all seeing the gas prices rise, that is the exact same thing, so.
Remember, you saw that rise just in the time period 2 months prior to the actual bids,
Yeah.
where we paid a larger sum than had we gone out to bid 2 or 3 months earlier. So that we started to see that and felt a little bit of that increase, not to the extent to where things may be now and in the future.
Yeah. Great.
Is that it? Awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you.
Thank
giving
you,
me the time.
Colin. Thank you,
Yeah,
Ashley.
Thanks, Mark.
Our next presentation is entitled Mental Health Supports and Initiatives, and as you hear throughout some of our monthly meetings, the Safe Schools components, our counselors take a large role in bringing updates to our quarterly Safe Schools meeting that we meet with the township and other entities throughout our community. It was also a request of the board that we have them come and present this evening to talk a little bit about, in the day and age in which we are and in the throes of COVID, some of the sports and initiatives that we've taken on and tackled over the last few years and how our K-12 system works. So I'd like to introduce all three of our speakers this evening. We have Christina Harris, who is a Pine Road counselor. We have Peg Krutzer, who is our Murray Avenue coordinator and counselor, and Mara Quinn, who is our lead counselor for the district K-12 and is one of our high school counselors. I'll turn it over to all three of you.
Thanks, Dr. David Heiser. It's really nice to see you all and to have this opportunity to talk with you a little bit about what we do every day, both in terms of prevention and intervention. As we all know, it's been a very difficult 3 years for everybody, including for our students, your children, and this is something we're working actively on, and it's great to have this chance to tell you a little bit more about that in detail. So we're going to start with Pine Road and Christina.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak on behalf of the mental health initiatives and school counseling programs at Pine Road Elementary School. At Pine Road, we have 2 school counselors, myself, Christina Harris, and this year I'm working with students in 1st grade, 3rd grade, and 5th grade. We also have Mr. Kyle Letterati, who is a long-term sub for Mrs. Shannon Dallahan, who is on sabbatical this year. Mr. Letterati is working with students in kindergarten, 2nd, and 4th grades. Our students have a school counselor on a looping system, which means that we provide one consistent school counselor to students during their entire educational journey at Pine Road. So the students that start with us in kindergarten have the same school counselor for all 6 years. Some of the things that our school counseling department does at Pine Road is to provide preventative social-emotional learning lessons. You can see some of the topics that I have listed on the slide here. These lessons are provided by the student's assigned grade level school counselor approximately 1 to 2 times per month throughout the duration of the school year. Additionally, we also have the following student support services that our school counselors provide to students. On an as-needed basis, these counseling services include individual counseling, small group counseling, our involvement in risk assessments, and our participation in the instructional support team, abbreviated as IST, and our school's SAP team, Student Assistance Program team, which I'd like to share next. Our Student Assistance Program is brought to us through a partnership with Aldersgate Youth Services Bureau, which is based in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. We're really fortunate to be able to partner with Aldersgate to provide our SAP programming. We have a wonderful SAP counselor, Mrs. Alicia Demko-Humbert. She comes to us and partners with our collaborative SAP team. The purpose of our team is to provide ways to support students and eliminate barriers to their learning experiences. So you can see on the screen some of the things that our SAP program provides to students. That includes screenings with our SAP counselor and our Aldersgate liaisons. MH3, which is abbreviated to be Mental Health 3, it's 3 hours of short-term mental health support. And then our SAP counselor also provides small group counseling for students. We have prevention programming available for our students. We have wonderful specialists, prevention specialists who come to us from Aldersgate that provide additional social-emotional learning lessons for our students. The 2 curriculums that we're currently using are our second STEP curriculum and our Too Good for Drugs curriculum. Additionally, I did want to highlight for you that we do have more SAP referrals this year than we have had at this point in the year than we had all of last year. We're just around that point. So last year we had 29 referrals. When I submitted this presentation, we were at about 26, and we are close to 29 at this point. So this is a wonderful service for our families that we're finding it is quite a need. Additionally, as part of the ESSER grant funding money, we were fortunate to have a student support counselor come on board this year through a partnership with Lakeside Educational Network. Ms. Mastrocola is our student support counselor. She comes to Pine Road 5 full days, and she provides individual counseling and small group counseling. This year, we're also seeing a big need for some extra social skill support for our students. It's been a long time since our students had as many normal, for lack of better words, traditional peer interactions, and we're finding that this is a way that we really need to support them. So we've asked Ms. Mastrocola to provide a few additional lessons in this area to provide our students with greater support. I also want to highlight and certainly show my appreciation for our many wonderful partnerships. In addition to Lakeside and Aldersgate, we're fortunate to partner with Victim Services Center in Norristown to provide a Keeping Touches Safe and Healthy lesson for our kindergarten through 3rd grade students, helping our students to understand what healthy and safe and appropriate touches look like. These are scheduled for the end of March and the beginning of April this year for our students, K-3. And this year's a new initiative through the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP. They are offering virtual parenting programs. And while we love to offer things to our students, we're also grateful for our partnerships with our parents. And so we're really excited to be able to offer this year to our families. Parents have the opportunity to sign up for these sessions, attend them virtually, and learn about some healthy social, emotional practices that they can be using at home with their children. So at this time, after I've summarized everything at Pine Road, I'd like to invite Mrs. Peg Kreutzer to speak on behalf of Murray Avenue.
Good evening. Thank you again for including us to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing in all of the buildings to support our students. So as Ms. Harris just said, I'm one of the student support counselors. You may have previously known us as the community counselor, so we just tweaked the name so that it's more reflective of how we're actually supporting the students in school, so that there wasn't confusion thinking that we were from an outside community provider. So when we talked before a little bit about preventative and responsive services, we also push into the classrooms to provide our No Place for Hate lessons and classroom lessons that address different things like bullying, being an upstander, appropriate language, and ways of dealing with conflict with our students. We also piloted a new program this year, which I'm sure that you've heard of from Ms. Stilks, but we are providing these social emotional curriculums to build opportunities for conversation and communication with our students this year. So each day, our students have the opportunity to discuss different prompts, and it helps them to facilitate that ability to communicate with each other and build community within the classroom. Some of those topics we have there are stress reduction, health and wellness, appreciation, coping skills for emotions, and inclusion. It's been really well received within our classrooms and a new opportunity for them that they're really engaging in. So we're very excited about that. We also started check-ins for our students last year when students were virtual. And this was a way for us to be able to just take a quick temperature about what are some of the obstacles that they might be dealing with being virtual students and then also later as hybrid students so that we could get a read on what we needed to support them with. We got really good feedback from the students, and I think it was just a great way for us to connect with them and for them to remember that we are a resource for them. So we've continued with that this year. We provide these check-ins quarterly after each of the marking periods just to check in to see how they're doing academically, with friends. Would they like to meet with the counselor? We also provided an opportunity this year, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, about signing up for different groups. And that was a great way for us to get an idea of what are some of the needs and interests that our students have so that we could provide those. The last thing is new students we reach out to in the beginning of the year. We have some groups for them to attend to get to know other new students and just to help them get acclimated to the building. We did this last year as well, but this year we included students who were fully virtual last year, just knowing that that was going to be an added stressor for them to get back into the building. So we reached out to them in the beginning of the year. We also have our, of course, responsive services that include individual counseling, small group counseling. Just like Ms. Harris had said, we conduct risk assessments. As of 2/9, we had 26, and as of today, we're up to 35. So that is an increase as well this year. And we participate in IST and SAP teams, as well as our school climate. We are very excited to be able to have the support this year of Lakeside. And we have Mrs. Lauren Selesky with us 5 days a week, and she's been able to really help support us for that individual counseling and to provide that small group counseling this year. So these are some of the topics that she proposed to the students to say, what are some of the things that you're interested in? And we had a really great response from students. 54 kids signed up for group and 125 signed up for the friendship lunch group. So we are slowly working our way through that group. But it's been wonderful to have that added support with the additional needs that we have this year. So we're very grateful for that. And last, as a student support counselor, my primary goal is really to help support our SAP initiatives in the building. Like Christina had mentioned, we work closely with Aldersgate. And this year we have had, now we're up to 39 SAP referrals. And 36 of those students have actually contacted Aldersgate, have had those screenings, and they've been able to support those families and put them in touch with outside supports. So that has been invaluable as we're really trying to meet those mental health needs that our students are presenting with this year. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Ms. Mara Quinn from our high school.
This one. Okay. All right, so thank you, Peg. Thank you, Christina. Again, I am Maura Quinn. I'm from the high school, and I work alongside of Mrs. Jennifer Romano and Ms. Alicia Oglesby, who is in this year for Mrs. Nikki Specht, and we make up the school counseling team. And adding to our team is our school-based counselor, also our college counselor, Mrs. Lindsay McFalls, and Ms. Mary Kachaba is our student support counselor and our SAP coordinator. So we've talked, at all three levels about SAP, and this just gives you a little bit more information about what that's about. Basically, as a student support counselor and a SAP coordinator, we're providing both individual and group support, crisis intervention, and we assist families with connecting to community resources. The primary focus in working with our students is to foster their personal growth, empower them to face challenges, and become self-reliant, improve their overall functioning and performance when they're struggling, and give them tools to navigate and manage life. Prevention is something open to anyone on a daily basis as needed, while intervention is a bit more specialized and ongoing, and that is tailored to meet the specific needs of students. And we follow the framework of the Student Assistance Program. The most common reasons we have referrals for student assistance would include stress, symptoms of anxiety, depressive type symptoms, academic and social concerns, substance abuse concerns, self-injury, risk to self, reentry from psychiatric hospitalization, and code of conduct violations. We average 52 SAP referrals per year. That number was down last year and is back up on par right now. So we are currently at 36. All right. So while that highlights, in a nutshell, some of the counseling supports that we provide, we also want to bring to life a little bit the way we crosswalk with our health and phys ed department. So our health and phys ed department proactively brought in a couple of people to present to both 9th and 12th graders earlier this year. So this is Mr. Ty Williams on the screen. He was our December presenter for seniors in health. He is the crisis community liaison and trainer for Access Services in Montgomery County. And he was here to present to students a 2-day training on what's called QPR. Question, persuade, refer. And what does that mean? Basically, the idea behind this training is that everybody can be a gatekeeper, all of us. We can all learn to recognize signs that somebody is in distress. Historically, this program was intended to provide training specific to the warning signs of suicide, and it's expanded, so it can really mean any kind of distress. So part of the training was informing students about this, and part of the training was allowing them some time to interact in groups and do some role play and get some practice with it. In a nutshell, the theme behind it is ask a question, save a life. And what you see on the screen up here are some specific feedback that we got from students who participated in this. And I won't read them all to you, but I'll just draw your attention to the last one. My biggest takeaway from QPR is that lives can be saved if we are able to have the courage to ask the difficult questions. And I think that sums it up pretty well. And so to know that our students walked away from this training with that mindset and that knowledge was heartening. So I definitely want to highlight the work of our health and PE teachers on this. And similarly, same group, health and PE, they brought in a presenter from our Montgomery County chapter of NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. Bernadette Selgrath is somebody we've worked with for years now. She's the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Ending the Silence program. It's not the exact same as QPR, but similar in the sense that students are trained to recognize warning signs, to understand a little bit more about mental health conditions, and to know what to do with if either they or somebody around them needs some extra help. The graph up here is just one piece of data we have from this, and I know it's a little bit hard to read, but of the students who responded to the feedback survey, we can see that 96% of them are telling us they now know how to help themselves or a friend if they notice any warning signs. And again, that is also very encouraging to us. All right, and this month, in February, we reached out to all of our students, 9 through 12, this is the school counseling team, via forum, just to say, how are you? How are you doing? What are you stressed about? What's going well? And how are you coping? And when you look up at this slide, the word school is obviously in the largest font, and that is because, for sure, this was the main theme in all of the responses. So the words you see on the screen in black were all patterns we saw emerging in the answers of areas of stress. The words you see in green were patterns in the answers as far as things that are going well. So school can be a stressor, but it also is the place where a lot of things are going well, especially as kids are reconnecting with their friends, with athletics, with clubs, and everything. And the words you see on the outermost part in blue are themes that we saw in terms of their coping strategies. So in a lot of the responses, even when students were telling us they were stressed, they were also often able to tell us how they are coping in positive ways, and that was encouraging. Certainly anybody who needs additional attention or help, we are responding to that. But overall, this presents to you the themes that we saw from that check-in that we just did last week. All right, here's my plug for the AFSP Suicide Prevention and Awareness Walk. Some of you probably remember that we launched this in 2019. I could not be more proud of our students that year. They brought together the community, the school community, the larger community. We had hundreds of walkers and raised over $10,000 in a very short amount of time. So that was a highly successful event. Here are some pictures from that event. Of course, the following year we had to cancel. And then last year we did a modified event. We had a smaller group who went down to Center City. The mural on the left is from the Mural Arts Project. This is where we met. And then we did a brief walk through the city because we still wanted to do something and we just made it a little bit different. This year we are bringing it back to campus. We would love community support. We would love to see our registration numbers go up. Our students just met today. They're working hard on this, and that was for sure our #1 area of focus, getting people to register, getting people on board. The walk is Saturday, April 9th. Registration begins at 7:30 a.m., and the opening ceremony will really begin around 8 a.m. Anybody can join a team, anybody can create a team, but the idea is to get people out as one community in support of this cause that we all know is so important. And for all of our board members, when you leave tonight, we do have some bags for you over here with materials specific to both AFSP and NAMI. All right, so thank you so much. We're here to answer any questions you may have.
Hi, thank you. I truly appreciate the work you're doing and the programs that you're running, and I couldn't endorse them anymore. The question I have is individual counseling. Are we taking a little bit too much upon ourselves to counsel a student individually, or if we recognize that a student has a particular need or an issue, we communicate that to the student's family and have the family engage an outside practitioner for that purpose. I'm questioning out of my ignorance, I'm questioning, should we be the ones that are providing that counseling, or should we be on an individual basis, or should we be recommending that they go and that they need the services of an outside provider?
I'm really glad you asked that question because that is an important point to clarify. We're not providing therapy. So when we're providing school-based counseling of any kind, any of our roles, we could be providing counseling along an academic realm, a social-emotional realm, or a college and career realm. And we're doing all of that. And I would say for the last few years, our kids have been affected in all 3 of those areas. If there is somebody in need of outside support that goes beyond the scope of school, we have a system in place for sure, where we communicate with parents, where we refer them to the outside. So we are not providing therapy in school. We're just providing school-based support, and that is an important distinction. Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot, and I want you to be dead honest with me.
All right.
Do you feel like our schools have enough resources in your area for counseling for all of our students?
Ooh. I'm not sure you're going to find a counselor who thinks that we have enough right now. But I will tell you, we have a great team. We have a team that works closely together. We cover all the bases in all 3 buildings. Are we seeing a lot? Are we working hard? Or are our kids in need of our support now more than ever? Yes. So do we have teams that are actively working all of the time? Yes. Anybody could always use more support, but yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I had 2 questions. Since our students are minors and they're relying on their parents to actually get help for them, I'm just wondering, for the most part, do you feel like parents are receptive to your suggestions, or do you meet resistance?
I have yet to meet a parent who does not want the best for their child. And so, in that way, and largely, it is a team effort. We are working together, home and school, to figure out what is best for that student. It takes certain, depending on the situation, there's work involved in that, sure, in terms of the communication back and forth. But yeah, parents are supportive, and I would say that we largely we're lucky that way.
My other question was, given the current situation in Ukraine and Russia, a large percentage of our population have ties to that region. So I'm wondering if you're seeing an increase in anxiety and concern over what's happening, confusion maybe, and is there anything additional in place to help deal with, a current issue that's come up like that?
So the answer to that question, I think, would really be different depending on the developmental level of the student. So I can speak to the high school and let Peg and Christina speak to Murray and Pine. At the high school, we're absolutely seeing it. We're seeing the stress. One thing that we've shared with teachers is that we believe, and we really do believe this, that the structure and support they provide every single day in the classroom is impactful in ways they don't even know. So sometimes when things feel so out of control, to be able to come into a classroom in an organized, systemic, structured way every single day and have the support of teachers goes a long way. We're giving teachers resources to have conversations as they come up with students. But yes, we are seeing an increase in students who are coming in seeking individual support to talk through whatever situation they have going on related to the conflict.
No, I'm happy to echo that. I just want to echo that we are seeing students with some increased needs during this time. And at Pine Road, the developmental level does look quite different than it does at the high school level, but we're really trying to meet students where they are. Students have questions and concerns, and our responsibility in this is certainly to be supportive and to communicate with families when there's a need for that. But really for kids to have that structured routine every day and know that school is a safe place where we have a lot of adults that care about them.
I had a question regarding the counselors from the Lakeside Educational Network who are here because of ESSER funds. How long do we have them in our district at this point?
Our understanding is this year, and I think it was negotiable about next year, at least that was my understanding.
Actually, it's 2 years.
It
It's
is
this
definitely
year
2.
and next year. Mrs. Drennan was able to write the grant in such a way to cover both years in conjunction with Mr. Giordano and the guidance staff. So again, we felt definitely we foresaw a need for those counselors, and I guess in conjunction with guidance staff, strategically utilize those funds because you could see the writing on the wall. And based on this presentation, absolutely they've been a value added addition to our school district.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Ms. Quinn, I apologize for my back to you. I have a couple of related questions. What's the typical source for SAP referrals? Are we reliant on self-referrals or teachers identifying students in need? And also, you mentioned a few times, and I think we've all noticed the increased number of SAP referrals. Is that related to increased awareness or increased need, or both? And are we able to identify issues earlier than before?
Good questions. So as far as the referrals, I would say that hasn't changed all that much. The primary source of referrals would be from teachers. Occasionally, we have referrals that come directly from parents, and occasionally we have students who self-refer. But I would say I haven't seen much of a change in that in the last few years. As far as the why, that's probably open to interpretation as far as why we're seeing more right now. But I would certainly say that from what I'm seeing, kids are just talking more. There's just so much they have to get out, based on their experience in the last few years especially. I think that may be part of it. Some of it may be that they're seeking an initial level of support just through a conversation, and we recognize a need that maybe they actually need a SAP referral. It could be that. And so I'd say that's what we're seeing at the high school level.
If I could just interject. I think it presents a little bit differently at the middle school level. I would say actually most of our referrals come from their peers. We are really, really fortunate that our kids are advocates for each other. We talk to them at our town meetings about looking out for those signs and speaking up and getting them the support that they need. So that's something that we've really instilled with them from 6th grade on. So it's typically social media. A friend will see something posted. They will make a comment. They can do this anonymously or come in and speak to us about their concerns. So I would say that's actually the majority for us at middle school. Of course, teachers and parents alike and individuals as that presents more in the counseling setting. But we get most of our referrals from their friends. As far as why are we seeing so much more of it? I think one of the very few positives that have come out of this pandemic is that it has brought to the forefront mental health and how critical it is for our well-being. And it has normalized us talking about anxiety and stress and loneliness. And those were things that people felt intimidated to bring up and maybe embarrassed about some of those things. And now it's normalized that just like our physical health, we have to take care of our mental health. So I think kids are becoming much more comfortable to have those conversations and to be able to say, like, I'm really struggling right now. So I think that's been one of the positives that has come out of that we're talking about it more.
I have a question. Are you seeing any difference in children who are online for most of the year versus children who were in the classroom? Like any differences in the types of referrals or the number of referrals?
So currently this year, I mean, we have very few students online currently.
In terms of referrals now, because the children were online last year.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm not sure we've looked at it that way. That's something we could take a look at.
I think that'd be an interesting thing if we could tease that out.
Sure.
Because maybe there would be isolation, feelings of anxiety coming back into the school.
Sure, we could definitely take a look at the number of referrals and look to see who was in person or hybrid versus online, for
Great,
sure.
thank you.
Sure.
And you have individual counseling sessions and small group counseling sessions. Just curious, when do they take place throughout the day?
So for us, for Ms. Kachaba, the student support counselor, primarily during study hall times or lunch periods would be the small groups. And individual counseling is largely the same. And again, that could take place with any school counselor, school-based counselor, or student support counselor. There are times that isn't possible for one reason or another. So students have to miss class time, but that's not typically how it happens.
Okay.
So if it's not, I would say if it's not during a study hall or lunch, the next likely thing would be an elective, if that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not after school? That won't happen after school?
It could. Individually, it could. The groups don't run after school.
Yeah.
At least at the high school.
Okay.
But individuals certainly stop by after school in all our offices.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Might be a little bit different at Murray and Pine.
For us, it's mostly during our win period, which is at the end of the day, which is that what I need. And so that's a great time that they're not missing instruction time, and we have a full period of 45 minutes there to support them. Also during lunches, especially for those friendship type issues where they're more relaxed and more just peer interaction and making those connections. And then also specials when we need to. Any other time would really be on a more of a as-needed impromptu situation where something just presented itself and a student needed to see us right away.
At Pine Road, it's also very similar that our students access these services during their win time, what I need, which is 30 minutes for kindergarten through 2nd grade and 40 minutes for students in 3rd to 5th. This year, our groups are mostly taking place with Ms. Mastrocola from our student support counselor from Lakeside, And then the individual counseling sessions with her also take place during WIN. But similarly, if a student had a need and it needed to be addressed immediately, we would make a school counselor available to meet with that student.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation, and thanks for all you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time and for the thoughtful questions. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Our last presentation is going to be somewhat of a presentation and discussion. I do want to unpack a number of things with you as it relates to some of the more recent CDC mask guidance, and I had an opportunity late this afternoon, actually just wrapped up about an hour ago, in meeting with the Office of Public Health in Montgomery County. We're going to go through a number of different things related to all of this information. So I'm going to step away to the podium to present that. So on Friday, the CDC released its newest guidance, which was a fairly seismic shift in guidance, signaling, for the most part, a philosophical shift from pandemic strategies toward endemic strategies. And the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, obviously awaiting that guidance, has been spending its weekend unpacking it, and as it's going to relate to schools and the community at large. I think most folks are probably aware through most of the news media as to what some of the general things are related to masks and some of that change as it relates to now a 3-category system. The newest guidance moves really closer to more personal risk assessments and responsibilities by individuals. And the CDC's new COVID-19 community levels recommendations, as they share on their site right now, which is not completely updated, again, they're still updating, align precautions for educational settings with those for other community settings. And that's really a first time for that to occur over the last 2 years, where they're overlaying both society and education, as they tended to keep those separate in some of their strategies and approaches to guidance with that. A new COVID-19 community level and indicator system has been created by the CDC, which takes into account three things. You can see those listed up there. The first is the new case counts per 100,000 over 7 days. And if you look on the left-hand column of the chart on the screen, you see that you have two choices, whether you're above or below 200. And currently, the Montgomery County is at 126.1 in terms of new cases across 7 days. That takes into account both PCR tests and antigen tests. If you looked on the Montgomery County Office of Public Health's data hub today, I think you would see that they are at approximately 60 cases per 100,000. That only includes PCR. The CDC website also takes into account the antigen tests that are done at some sites. So it's a combination of both. So Montgomery County right now, as of today, falls at 126.1. So you're looking at the fewer than 200 column as you work your way across there. And there's two indicators then that are used. One is, as it's listed there, the new COVID-19 admissions per 100,000, and that's admissions into the county hospitals. And then the percent of staffed inpatient beds occupied by COVID-19 patients. So currently the data for the county, again, following across fewer than 200, has the admissions at 11 hospital admissions. So you can see that falls one over the low, so they're in the medium. And it has a 4.6% inpatient beds. So again, you can see that it falls in that low category. And the suggestive there, the disclaimer at the bottom is if they differ in any way, that you take the higher of the two. And we asked that today as superintendents of the county, where exactly are we? We knew we were in medium. Where does that mean? Were we a case away from high, or were we a bed or a patient away from low? Where exactly did that situate us in terms of? So you can see from that standpoint where we are, and the way the trajectory, it appears that the metrics are heading, that Montgomery County could soon be shifting into a low category with regards to that. I believe 2 local counties, Berks being one, and I forget the other county, are the majority of the state falls into the medium category. There are some, probably as many low as there are high counties across the state right now, probably close to about a dozen each, and the rest make up the medium category. So, with these, this shift is really from, and this shift really indicates a little bit of away, and as the county described it today, away from counting cases, which was really a prevention strategy prior to a number of mitigation strategies being in place, namely the therapeutics and the vaccines that are part of really trimming this pandemic, and shifting now to looking at the types of cases. So it's as they shared, it's really that shift toward preventing severe disease within individuals rather than looking at case counts and counting numbers related to that. Metrics such as incident rate and positivity rate really can't detect severity, and it really can't detect the type of impact that it's having on hospitals. So the endemic strategies that the CDC is now imparting with this latest guidance is really taking that to a different level of an endemic strategy. While they're certainly concerned with those individuals to whom get the cold-like side effects, they're more concerned with those that have more severity to the type of diseases that are occurring with relation to this. So it takes a different approach in terms of those metrics and really focusing in on the severity as it relates to the hospital impact, and certainly those individuals to whom are having more severe impacts related to COVID. So again, why the change? A shift more from preventing transmission toward preventing medically significant disease. And you can see the indicators that we talked about. As they shared, and again, this was a PowerPoint developed by the County Office of Public Health, criteria for selecting indicators where the data is coming from. They're moving toward a more community-based system and looking at the impact on the healthcare systems as it relates to a larger community, hence the county approach to this. And the data that's going to be provided is based on a county level, and that's nationwide as well. They are, the County Office of Public Health has said that they are moving forward and will be reporting at least weekly. They are proposing for that to be done on a Friday update so that folks will know in the communities to which they live and in the counties to which they live that this will be a Friday update. They are going to be eliminating the data as it relates to school districts and municipalities, since it's not in alignment with the CDC's most recent guidance, to which really drilled down and looked at incident rate and positivity rate across municipalities inside each of the counties. So they're going to be doing away with that. They will not be updating, they said as of Monday, March 7th, it will no longer exist on their data hub. And it sounded like, and again, they're catching up a little bit here too, they're hoping to have their hub updated Friday or possibly at the latest by Monday with the indicators that I just showed you a little bit earlier. Although you can already go on to the CDC page and find some of that information. So again, here just describes a little bit of what I just shared with you, and March 7th. So again, they talked with us today as superintendents about that layered prevention strategies, vaccines, obviously as high importance, and really asked us to share that information with our communities and continue to message that with our communities. Screening, testing, ventilation, wearing a mask can limit and help with severe disease. And again, schools in general and community settings can do some additional different things that aren't available to individuals, such as physical distancing and contact tracing on a larger scale. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Importance of vaccination, again, you can see here, and we will continue to partner, and we've had some conversations more recently with the possibility of hosting another vaccination clinic to see if we can't urge any other community members to coming out and expanding it even beyond just our school parameters, just to increase the impact in our own community here in Lower Moreland. And we will continue to encourage and consider that. So the masking recommendations that came out of the CDC, the county is going to be aligning with those exactly, and those are listed here on the screen. And you can see based on the 3 different categories, they have no recommendations. If in low, medium, to which we're in currently, it suggests that immunocompromised or any high-risk individuals, and high risk can mean age, it can mean a number of different things, should have some conversations with their physicians about what they should be doing. And in high, the recommendation is to wear a well-fitting mask while indoors, regardless of any status that you have in regards to the vaccination. And again, the communication about and adjustments related to changing and masking recommendations, the fluidity of going in and out. One of the things that they could not answer was the fluctuation. Is it going to be a weekly thing of how this category system works of low, medium, and high? If you're updating numbers, it appears it could. So that's yet to be determined in terms of how they're going to message that out and what's going to be the results of that as it is. With our current health and safety plan, if you recall, we have 2 weeks, and then it has to be 2 consecutive weeks of certain metrics that we were looking at with regard to our plan. When we talk about isolation quarantine requirements, there's nothing that changes with regard to that. And again, that's, as we've shared on numerous occasions, that's part of health code in Montgomery County. So isolation, if you do test positive, is required. It's a 5-day isolation period right now, at minimum, or at least until your symptoms resolve themselves. And then the wearing of a mask, if you're coming back in, especially in a school setting, coming back in, wearing that for the 6 to 10 days that follow with regard to that. Quarantine, again, is still a requirement. And we'll get into how a quarantine could happen and some of the changes that are occurring based on some of the contact tracing recommendations that they are now suggesting as they shift into this more endemic strategy as a county health department as well, and the realization of masks being off and such. So what was shared today was what you see here on the screen, which is inevitably most of what we see and the results of what we see when we hear of cases and reported. So in a single case of COVID reported, which is 99.9% of everything that we've seen, we get a report that a student was positive, has tested positive. We go back, trace that back to the exposure date and the last time that they were in school. And then we were in the system that we are currently employing and have been employing across the last 2 years, we would contact trace that for all individuals, and dependent then with regard to mask, no mask, vaccine, no vaccine, fully vaccinated, not fully vaccinated. A lot of things came into play. When we were all masked and we were meeting spacing requirements and distancing, there were some considerations made this year with 3 feet rather than 6 feet. And that's how we were doing things for the last really 2 years. They're signaling a change in order to be able to do this and to do it in these cases, that we do what I think, referenced with the board in the past, a little bit of a more surveillance contact tracing. They're using a broad-based exposure notification, which is just different wording, same type of process if we did get a report of a student as a single case, we would send a communication out, or they're suggesting that a school would send a communication out to the exposure settings. The last time that individual was in a classroom or on a bus or some type of school setting that we could then send out, and we could send those communications out in electronic means fairly quickly, just noting to families that there was we did receive a report of a positive individual in the classroom setting or in the bus that your child rides, and it puts them on notice that they should just be aware, check for signs and symptoms with their own child. If any signs or symptoms do occur, please isolate them. Refer to your doctor or have that individual tested if those symptoms do not go away in any form. That's the recommendation from the county right now in moving toward an endemic strategy. It's something we had been before we all started talking in the terminology of COVID, when we had pertussis, the whooping cough. That was the type of contact tracing that we would utilize. We would isolate the positive individual, and we would do a broad-based exposure notification to the settings to which that individual may have been in, and alerting folks of what to look for in signs and symptoms, and if they see that with their own child, that they should address that with their doctor immediately. That's different from what they're also then suggesting in situations where outbreaks may occur. And in an outbreak situation, which they're defining as 3 or more cases, they're suggesting we go back to doing a traditional true contact tracing so we can zero in, identify the individuals that may have been exposed in that setting, and really be able to center on those folks to check for signs and symptoms with them, allow them an opportunity to get tested, allow them an opportunity to wear a mask for a certain period of time, for the Mask to Stay program to be incorporated in that, and allow that process to be very much like we have been doing contact tracing for the last 2 years. We've never had to do that. We haven't had an outbreak system. We haven't, but we've not really removed the mask except for this past week. And, but that is what they're requiring to do. And we are required to do what they say in terms of contact tracing with regards to this. So I wanted to make you aware of what their recommendations are to that process. We've had 2 individuals across the week since we've had no masks. We've had 2 reported cases. I think we have currently 5 across the last 14, but 2 of those reported since we took masks off, so we're not seeing any, and there was no connectedness to those cases. They were from different buildings. No connectedness to those. However, when we traced those, the difficulty in tracing that was who was wearing a mask, who wasn't wearing a mask, what was the distance, who was the distance, a number of different things that were very, very challenging to be able to do and accurately do those, and not a lot of compliance when it came to some of the situations when it came back to masking and any close contact that may have been not fully vaccinated or not vaccinated at all in terms of their compliance with masking to stay and those sorts of things. It was challenging. One contact was 25 individuals, right? Just based on that. None of the individuals, as of today, about any of those 2 have had any symptoms as a result from any exposures that took place. But we have had those 2 individuals in a week's time.
Can I ask a quick question? Just where it says 3 or more cases among student staff, is that per classroom, per building?
Same time, same setting. So a classroom. Setting meaning like a elementary classroom. You had 3 individuals that you have positive cases with that are in that same setting of that same time period. That's what they're looking as an outbreak.
Okay, so 3 in a building wouldn't qualify. You're talking about a
No, it's got to be.
classroom.
It's really drilled down to a setting, right, to that close contact type of area. So in an area of let's say an elementary classroom, if you have 3 inside of that, if you were to then go and contact trace that, you're probably involving nearly all of the students in that one classroom. That would have to be part of that trace, as you may have 3 students sitting a little bit different areas and you go 6 feet out, you've just about covered the entire. Or it might be a baseball team. We're heading into spring sports, that sort of thing. And, you know, as they came in and we're at a meeting in a dugout or something like that, it might be that you're tracing the entire team because of that, for that one particular setting.
Dr. David Heiser?
Yeah.
Is the CDC saying that if the local hospitals are at capacity and we're in a high level, then we need to wear a mask? But if the local hospitals are not in a high capacity, then masks are optional?
So they're suggesting an endemic, this is a shift of endemic strategy. So it's 2 years of us thinking about this a little bit differently, right? 2 years we've been looking at case counts, we've been looking at positivity rate. They've shifted that thinking now toward more endemic strategies to look at, because those 2 things don't necessarily signal severity of the disease. They don't signal what sorts of impacts they have on healthcare systems as a result. And we're all, you know, this is not going away, right? We're going to be living with COVID. There's always going to be cases. So if we continue to count cases, not really look to the impact on the services to be able to deal with the more severe illness that's occurring, you know, that's their focus as we move into this endemic. So they've created these indicators to first look at new cases in your county, and they've used, I can't answer the question why 200 or how 200 came to be, that you're either below or above. Somewhere in the CDC archives, they should be able to explain that. Must be a tipping point from some research. But then it's looking, after you make that determination, are you above or below, then it's given the metrics on the impact of the hospitals themselves and the healthcare systems. And they're taking into account not just hospitals, I would expect other doctors' offices, other types of impacts that they have, but they are looking at admissions with hospitals and as it relates to COVID, if it is a COVID admission, and the hospital inpatient take, you know, the more severe and its impact on that. That's the determination that they're using to make judgment on, are you in low, medium, and high. In no one level do they say nobody should wear a mask. The masking is certainly up to, they're recommending that that's an individual component and decision that they need to make and an individual makes for themselves. They're making recommendations based on the indicators to make recommendations. And low, they don't have it with regard to masking. It is so low. The medium, they're saying high risk, so, and immunocompromised individuals. And high, they're recommending that people indoors wear masks.
So again, forgive me, if the local hospitals are swollen, the CDC is saying, or the CDC is recommending that if we're in a high capacity, we would wear a mask, a recommendation, not a requirement. So
Correct.
The word requirement is no longer in the dictionary?
It's not part of their language that they use, right? They recommend. The county has aligned, and the county aligns with their recommendation. I will tell you that, you know, this endemic shift is making the words mandate and require almost unenforceable as we continue on along this trajectory. They signal, there's a pretty seismic shift of guidance that they delivered on Friday, but it does signal a shift in their thinking and planning for endemic types of strategies. Not to suggest that the pandemic is going away, and nor that COVID is ever going to go away. It's always going to be here with us. We're going to have cases with it. just like we do with other viruses.
So so what went away is the word requirement.
They never had require. The CDC never said require. They always said they recommended universal masking in K-12 schools, and that guidance has been on for about 8 months, has been their guidance. No matter the conditions, that guidance has been part of their language of recommendations. The Montgomery County Office of Public Health shifted that a little bit with regard to some of their metrics based on the conditions that I believe they were seeing and feeling and the need in the county level itself.
Does a school district have the legal right to mandate a mask if they were, for example, at a high level?
The school district, and it's still, the health and safety plans are still on the lap of the school boards to create. We are right now receiving ESSER funds, and as part of the ARP ESSER funds, one thing that we must have, and we need to have this if we want to continue with those funds through the 23-24 school year, is to maintain a health and safety plan inside of that.
Well, at the
School boards have had that autonomy to do that with regard to it. What this latest language and guidance has shifted, though, it's been I think you have to look at it that the language itself has changed from a philosophical standpoint of where they're shifting as a health department toward creating endemic strategies, saying that this is something we're going to live with forever. These are things that we're going to focus on, more focused on the severity and dealing with the sick and those individuals as we move forward, rather than counting the cases as we move forward, in order to better inform the community. And they've never had a requirement when it's come to anything other than the order that was placed for school transportation. Outside of that, it's always been a recommendation. The orders, if you recall, were delivered by various governors, and Governor Wolf had two different orders that was placed on through the state health department. And when that was removed in December, again, it was back in the laps of school districts to make decisions with regard to that. You know, I think one of the things that's in there, and when we start using the word mandate and require, is this shift, just as of Friday, has really left any enforceability to mandate and require on the large scale nearly impossible as we move forward. The shift has been, through the language of the CDC, intentional or not, has been to put this back into individuals' laps to make decisions based on their own risk assessment and vulnerability, to make decisions, and for organizations and schools to be able to communicate those levels and communicate what it itself wants to communicate. But it's made, and I will share with you that it's made very, very difficult just in a week's time in dealing with masks coming off, nearly impossible to enforce. And I would imagine, and the modeling suggests that we're going to continue, and I hope we never fall back up into a high category again. But to revert back to a mandate and requirement as it relates to masking in a school is going to be extremely difficult to do.
Why do you say that? I don't really understand why you're saying it would be extremely difficult or impossible to do.
Well, I'm saying that because I've been dealing with it already this week, of refusal of parents to have their students wear a mask when asked to wear a mask, when we've had 25 close contacts and some individuals through our Mask to Stay program, because we still have a health and safety plan that directs our contact tracing and the requirements of that. So we've been dealing with that with buses already. We've been dealing that with masks already. And I would expect, after living in a world of individuals having the option to do what they feel is best for themselves, to put back a requirement and a mandate is going to be nearly impossible to do. You know, absent
Dr. David Heiser, our
well, let me
current code
finish.
of conduct was rewritten to accommodate rules for wearing masks.
It was, and it is.
And are you telling me that was never enforced?
Oh, it's always been enforced. However, absent of me having an administrator walk into a classroom, carry a student out over their shoulder, is where I'm talking about the enforceability. That's the depths to which, that's the real life of running schools today. I'm just informing you of enforceability. We have a great many compliance. If a mandate or an action of require is placed back on, we will not have 100% compliance. And it's going to be difficult every single day to run our buildings in the way and manner. It looks good in planning and on paper, but I can tell you the reality of that, we will certainly and can ask for the compliance from all. Will we get compliance for all? No. We're a microcosm of society. And you see how society has acted with regard to this, and it's been given back to the individuals as such. Will we have a great many people that will comply and work with us if we ask them to wear a mask back if the county is back in a high? I would imagine we would, but we're going to have some that will not. And we have a code of conduct, absolutely. I can't arrest students. I can't carry them out over our shoulders. But that's going to be the reality of what we have with regard to running schools.
So, excuse me, if an exposed student experiences symptoms and refuses to wear a mask, there's no enforcement of that? What are we saying?
Well, if I have a student I can't get out of the building because I can't get him out of a desk, I can't carry him over, I can't have an officer arrest him and handcuff him, those are the realities that exist in our schools throughout these types of experiences. And I would imagine as we move forward in endemic types of positioning and we continue, and hopefully the trajectory remains in the very lowest of types of categories, but if it were to revert itself to do that and to require that, I think we'd have a great many of people that would for the betterment of our healthcare systems, for the betterment of all, would do that, but would we have everybody? No, and that's the reality that our principals live with now, today, have lived with for some time, and it's going to continue in that trajectory, and only, I would imagine, become more and more difficult to enforce that.
So am I hearing that we basically don't have our own health and safety plan? We're simply going to be following the CDC guidelines, and that's the way it is?
Well, the way it is how 9 of you vote on a health plan. I'm only suggesting and standing here tonight to suggest to you the realities of running schools, suggesting recommendations towards certain things, and what we can and cannot do. We haven't even gotten into what we can plan to do, but I'm cautioning the board with the wording of mandate and require. There's reasons that the Montgomery County Office of Public Health, there's reasons that the CDC, who has the ability to require, they've done that with busing and transportation through an order, could do those types of things, but why they're not doing those types of things when a community would be in high. So while I understand our responsibility to the greater good of society, I'm also going to be very honest and very practical and very real with you. Trying to administrate a plan that has mandate and require during times of the greatest surge of this was some of the most challenging times because of some of the non-compliance that we had to deal with at times, let alone times to which we're going to move into endemic strategies. The CDC has signaled that through their wording. And that has really sent a message to society in general. So I have to stand before you, and I need to deliver this information so you get a clear picture and a clear understanding of what a day-to-day running a school. And we're not unlike any other school.
basically, once again, what the administration is telling us, because you see it firsthand, is that we're going to be following the CDC guidelines, and that's pretty much it. We can't come back and say, okay, we'll go along with low, medium, and high, no masks, but if we wanted to put masks on in the transportation zone, we want to do that. You're saying it's not enforceable, so we really don't have that, for lack of a better word, luxury of making that decision if we were so inclined.
Well, for 2 years now, and I've been accused of this, of picking and choosing various forms of guidance. And we have picked various forms of guidance because it's the type of guidance that's allowed us to operate safely. It's allowed us to operate in person. The CDC has hundreds of pieces of guidance, some of which is practical and can be administrated, some of which can't in real time, some of which we don't have the resources to be able to do things. So we have picked and choose some of that, not to cherry pick just because we want to, because this is going to get us this, but because we've intentionally looked at the guidance to say what things keep us safe. We've yet to have a spread in 2 years in our buildings. And we've been able to be one of the few schools from the start that was able to get back into person and maintain that presence. You've done the job for 2 years as a board. Part of it, I think, is looking at this and saying, it's nice to have that back in the medical industry's hands to be able to guide some of that. And take from that guidance to be able to message it to our families in the future as we move into this endemic type of strategy. You know, one of the struggles that I've seen, and it's been deteriorating boards, has been what's been thrown at the feet of you over the last 2 years. It's been remarkable things that you've had and been challenged to do and think about that aren't in a lot of your wheelhouses to be able to do, and the types of pressure that's created on it. Now is an opportunity where the CDC has signaled this shift in endemic strategies to move now this away from you and say, let's get back to the business of educating. We'll continue to take strategies that are going to try to maintain as much safety as possible, but society in general, and they've aligned society and schools through this type of guidance.
Do we have I mean, they pretty much handcuffed us, for lack of a better word. Do we have the ability, given that you had indicated that the CDC is still compiling their rules and going to explain them or annotate them in a more clear
No,
fashion?
they've come out with they haven't updated their education pages yet, but through the county and what we learned today, and what they message is that and I think I shared this with you, and the actual was, the CDC's new COVID-19 community levels recommendations align precautions for educational settings with those for other community settings. So they've aligned these now more closely than ever before, where they looked at them somewhat differently, but there's more alignment with that. I don't expect whatever else comes out is going to change that in any way.
Do we have the ability to say we will be following the CDC guidelines in full, for example, in a month, which gives them time to address all their open issues?
Well, you have a health and safety plan that has a design right now. The problem with the design is that the metrics are going away in 6 days, right? Those metrics are not going to be available by the county any longer. So, yeah, the county has aligned themselves with this. Absent of you creating some other type of plan, would be that recommendation. Now, whether you adopt that now, we're still in a mask recommended environment now. Our metrics still remain in that substantial, and it carries out for another couple of weeks. So when you adopt that is really up to you. I would suggest that you move toward that as soon as possible so that we can inform the community as to what you're moving toward and that we can inform them of the various categories related to their latest guidance. The board, this evening, there's a few things that I'd ask of the board, and some of which is to adopt, to authorize the district to adopt the CDC mask guidelines. The recommendation on buses needs to be decided right now as well, since the order has come off buses. So what's the alignment going to be with buses? And then we need to talk about the contact tracing that the county has recommended that we move to as well. So those are all things that are going to have to be either given discretion to me to move forward with and ratified later at a voting session, or placed on hold and put at a voting session. I would recommend that there aren't too many options available. The shift is toward an endemic strategy as we move forward here.
So when
I'm
the
just
dust
simply
settles-
cautioning the board when it comes to mandate and require, the enforceability to that has strongly been taken away.
Right. Well, thank you. And when the dust settles, we have nothing to discuss.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see the point of coming up with a new policy if you're telling us that you're helpless to enforce it.
I'm not suggesting we come up with another policy. There is no other option, to be honest with you. I'm here
Why
updating
are we
and I'm...
discussing this? Why are we wasting the time on it if
Well,
there's
to
nothing
be honest with you, Ms.
to-
Natter, I'm here trying to unpack everything that was shared at 4 o'clock on Friday, which we as a board and you as a board have not talked about out loud with regard to that, and giving some thoughts and ideas to behind the scenes of metrics and everything else associated to that. I don't need to have any more discussion if you feel that that's enough information for this evening.
Dr. David Heiser, you know, I've read the new guidance, and I agree with you that it shifts towards an endemic strategy. The biggest difference in my mind is that it accounts for the severity of illness and the strain on the healthcare system, and it uses the cases in the community as sort of an early indicator of getting to there. So to your question, Alan, we'll be in high when the hospitals are full. We'll be in high when the hospitals are full, according to this new guidance. My question to you, Dr. David Heiser, is I'm still not understanding the change in enforceability when a week ago, when masks were mandated, we were enforcing things just fine. This is mostly a change in the metrics in terms of when we are high, medium, or low, now in a 3-tier system rather than a 4-tier system.
Well, we can still continue to say we're going to require that in high. I'm projecting out enforceability with regard to that, how that's going to play out in a month of November of 22, if hospitals are high, and what that exactly looks like. Because I think what we're going to have is a refusal by many of our parents to have students in masks. We'll have a refusal of students that might be in who will be taking their masks off, and our inability to sufficiently run an operation. Because I see this as a change to the endemic, a shift to, and we can certainly message and put whatever types of language you want inside of that. I can't bring police in to arrest students. I can't carry students out of classrooms. So that's the reality. I don't know
Let's
what.
not dramatic, Dr. David Heiser. Where no one's suggesting police need to be involved here.
Well, then please tell me what you mean that we of enforceability.
2 weeks ago, we were all in a mental state where people were cooperating and wearing masks because they were required. Should we ever get back to a high level, and I hope we don't, and masks, I think it would be in the public's interest, safety and interest to make masks mandated again.
Well, I
the
believe.
CDC has essentially said that, to wear masks indoors when in high.
Yes, but their language was not there 2 weeks ago from what they just shared on Friday, which is a complete shift. It wasn't a universal. They were recommending a universal masking in schools. Now their shift has been, this is an endemic strategy, and recommend if it goes back into high that they wear a mask.
Right.
I'm trying to share with you how I see right now in systems where we aren't in high, the challenges that exist to where I see the challenges and the flaws that are going to happen. So I don't mean to be dramatic, but that's some real life things that have occurred throughout schools in this country just this year.
I'm still not understanding, if you can enforce a dress code generally, why not enforce a dress code that includes wearing a mask? If a student showed up in school in a bikini top, are you telling me that you would just put up with it because, you know, what are you going to do? That's what they want to wear to school. It's their
No,
personal
but I don't
choice.
have hundreds showing up not doing that.
Maybe if you started enforcing, then hundreds wouldn't show up
We
that
do
way.
enforce, Ms. Natter, and I take offense to that implication.
Students who haven't been wearing masks in school, have they been suspended? Has there been any students suspended for not wearing a mask?
Yes, we've dealt with students on a number of disciplinary areas that had to deal with masks through 2 years.
Come and talk to us 2 weeks ago who said that their entire class session was a waste of time because the teacher spent the whole session telling them to put on masks. So I'm thinking that if the code was enforced and those students were penalized for not cooperating, then maybe those class sessions wouldn't have been interrupted by the teacher constantly having to tell them to wear a mask.
And we deal with those every day, all day.
I
And
have a
have been
question.
through 2 years.
I have a question. Right now, we're nowhere near high. No one has to wear a mask who doesn't want to wear a mask, correct?
That's correct.
Therefore, what is the problem with, until we have an issue, to leaving what we have in place and then addressing it if it ever goes to high again? What is the problem with that? I understand sometimes it's better to act before it happens, but my question is, what are we losing if we just leave our health plan, health and safety plan, as it is until we get to the level where it could be in the high range? Are we losing anything? Are we creating a problem for anyone if we just leave it the way it is?
Well, the health and safety plan currently is on a different metric system that is going away in 6 days. So it does have to be changed.
If we, in fact, in the past, went against whatever rules were in place, and the school boards still have the choice of doing what they choose to do, even though the metric has to go away, there still is a metric that is viable for the school district. And if it goes to 100 cases per 100,000, unless I'm wrong, then basically, what is the problem with leaving what we have now for 3 months, 2 months, whatever it is, until we are faced with the problem?
Dr. Cohen, because these metrics have been proposed and adopted by the CDC with good reason. It makes sense to make a change in the metrics to reflect that we're paying attention to the severity of the illness as it affects the community. I have no problem with that. What I have issue with is a characterization of a scenario where we're back in high and that the enforceability of a mask mandate would be impossible. That's my issue.
If the metric goes away, what is high?
We're replacing it with the CDC's new metric of high based on 200 per 100,000 as the threshold, but also the hospitalization rate and the percentage of inpatient beds occupied by COVID
Okay,
patients.
so we would have a new metric, basically.
As proposed by the CDC, yes.
So what's wrong with doing the new metric?
There's nothing wrong with the new metric. It's what happens when we, should we, God forbid, get back into high, as defined by the new metric. And I'm saying, for the safety of us all, as we chose to do last year, impose a mask mandate, we should enforce it and expect our community to do the right thing.
Okay,
What I'm hearing from Dr. David Heiser is that that would be incredibly hard to do.
Okay. I am not at a hospital now. And when we were at the top of the pandemic, did we ever get to 200,000 cases, whatever the new metric would be?
In January.
Okay.
I also want to say, just to be clear, the CDC is not a governing body that makes rules or enforces laws. They make recommendations based on scientific data, and it's up to governing bodies, not unlike ourselves, or legislatures, et cetera, to make the rules, either listening to those guidelines or ignoring those guidelines, but those guidelines are put out there to help people, sometimes us, make those decisions. They don't make the actual rule.
I'd like to hear the rest of the presentation.
Sure. So some other recommendations that we discussed this afternoon, some of which is what we're still capable of doing is symptomatic testing. And obviously any student that now even comes down with symptoms, our nurses have that capability. We have our assurance testing program that we're utilizing with staff and on a voluntary basis. The mask to stay, test to stay, and if you recall, that shifted a little bit with language. The mask to stay is going to be, is maintained. However, it's maintained only inside if there is any type of outbreak. Obviously, with that type of surveillance, contact tracing that the county is suggesting being done right now, makes it nearly impossible to do that because you're not identifying exactness to any close contact, but you are when you do it during an outbreak time. The test to stay was shifted to, if you recall, close contacts that were in staff households, and that was an impetus for the county back in December to get staff some relief in getting back into the workplace. It does not really, nor has it really impacted us in any way. We've really not had that. We've only had a couple cases early, actually, before that program began. So again, who do we target? During that mask to stay, if we were to close contact trace during an outbreak and truly do the contact tracing to the depth that we had been for 2 years, it targets the partially or unvaccinated students. They would be required through this, through the through the quarantine period to wear their mask all the way up through and including through days 6 through 10 for that to be able to stay and to do that. And the test to stay, again, is a target of staff. They're shifting the Project ACE. They came out of the CHOP. Medical services, we've now shifted that, in which the MCIU is actually going to be coordinating distribution for those. And we're going to be using the Binax Now test kits during that transition. Screening, sick policies, again, suggesting more of an emphasis with communicating this to your general public and your population about the emphasis of staying home when you're sick, understanding, good hygiene practices and messaging all those different types of things as we've tried to continue to do throughout this pandemic. We will still have reporting requirements, even though the CDC has changed, we still have reporting requirements for that, and OPH will be working with us in consideration there. You can see with regard to the consideration with any outbreaks that could possibly occur.
Dr. David Heiser, what happens to visitors?
What happens to visitors? So currently under our health and safety plan, a visitor we've determined that to be anybody that comes in during the course of the school day, during the time in which schools are occupied, that they must have a mask on to visit or to be part of anything, since they're not a permanent employee. Even during this time, we've had that, and we've made that very clear. Even people that come in just for a few hours to work in the classrooms, we've had that. So that'll have to be a decision by the board as to what you want to do moving forward with that.
So the visitor issue will not change?
That's up to you as a board.
Do we have the authority to mandate a mask requirement for a visitor?
Again, as it has been shared here, you have the authority to do anything you feel as a board you'd like to do with the health and safety plan. So that is the end of the presentation. I can answer any other questions. I'd be happy to.
Dr. David Heiser, I do agree with the CDC's, with the tri-party, the tri-data information, but what's a little bit confusing to me, I think, is over the last, 2 years, we've seen such disparity within the county of the school districts, from ours to Cheltenham's to other districts that have been so high. Now we're all kind of one county, so I'm not sure that, I don't know. I'm
I think
not
part of
agreeing
that
with
is for, the CDC to do that nationwide. Nearly impossible to do it
Yeah.
on a real drilled down level. Obviously, county level, a little bit more manageable. But the services used inside a county usually stand for, multitude of communities and municipalities. I think there's upwards of 61, 62 municipalities in Montgomery County, all seeking similar hospital systems inside. So I think they landed on that as a convenience to be able to gather certain data points with regard to it. Yeah, it's a shift. There's a lot of shifts.
Yeah,
Things that we've been thinking about and doing for 2 years. It's not an easy philosophical shift for thinking on an endemic side of things the way it appears the CDC has with this latest guidance and some of the things that others are speaking about. And I think there's some probably good and bad, and there's some time that's going to take for acclimation to a number of different things through this.
Have you had a superintendent's, so this came out Friday, here we are Tuesday, 3-4 days later. Did you have you said you had a call today with Montgomery County, was that with the superintendents as well?
It was, yeah, all county superintendents concerned.
Did other superintendents share the same thoughts that you did, that what was 2 weeks ago, we mandated masks and we enforced it? Were they saying the same thing, that we can no longer do it?
Yeah, for the most part. And we're hearing similar conversations about that. The pressure points on communities and the shifts of where that is, and it's been difficult for many districts to maintain that, as we've seen numbers decrease and pressure points on and refusals to do such. And as a district, we write that in there. We'll do everything we possibly can to maintain what this board wants. But there's some reality to all of the struggles to where that can and is difficult and to even do on a full daily basis. That's just not. And that's not to suggest that anybody's not doing something. We have teachers working extremely hard and doing a lot of those things to assist with that, and administrators dealing with the consequences of a lot of those types of things. So they're all part of this. There's just a reality to some things that are a little bit different than just simply dress code. There are, and that shift on Friday, that language began. There was a movement toward that even before, but that signaled a greater shift towards some of that. There were a few schools, not that we compare ourselves to other school districts, but I think there's 4 or 5 Montgomery County school districts that adopted the CDC mask recommendations just yesterday. I had a board meeting last night. I think there's some others that were on for this week. Most were shifting toward doing that. And just like us, any other metrics are going away on a local level.
Right.
So it almost is forcing into that guidance.
Right.
But boards still today have the autonomy to do as you want with regard to your own health and safety plan. And the requirements are not that you want to impart inside of those.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Geiger, one thing with regards to the concerns about the metrics not reflecting our community versus the county, I think one thing, if you're looking at hospital data, it's unlikely that every other hospital in the county is going to be full, and yet our local hospital is going to be half empty. So it's probably going to still, I think, be
I agree.
relatively representative.
I thought about that, right. Abington Hospital is going to be with Lower Moreland, with all residents, not just many districts. I agree.
And Dr. David Heiser, with regards to enforceability, I think I appreciate what you're saying. I think there's a lot of many things in society that we mandate that are difficult to enforce, but we don't necessarily just eliminate rules that are beneficial for public safety. We enforce them as best we can. We make, you obviously don't bring in the Army and set up speed traps, but you do what you can to educate people, to limit bad behaviors, and I think I don't like the idea that we would just identify something as important for safety and then just say, but we can't enforce it, so we're not going to do it.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't enforce it. I said the enforceability of it is going to be, I don't think, as you expect. And I completely agree with you when it comes to certain things with regards to that. But I think there is some understanding on this board that that's done to 100%, that every student's walking in there and those masks are on. That's not the reality of what we deal with on an everyday basis for 2 years. And it's gotten increasingly difficult as we've continued on. And I would expect, and I have to be able to project for you in a mask optional situation to which we are, and being in that for such a long time, hopefully a long time period, to enact some sort of requirement back on is just going to make it even doubly difficult to continue to enforce that. Not that we won't. We work at the will of the board, so what you put in place, we will follow and do to the best of our abilities. Anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to be a little bit mundane with my presentation compared to the presentations that we've had so far, but this is getting back to business with our 22-23 budget, giving the board an update, and if anyone had a chance to review, the presentation mirrors a lot of what we did last year, to the point where I forgot to change a couple dates on one of the slides, so that is on me. Quickly, the budget process. Act 1 index was released in September, 3.4%. You can see all the work that we've done so far. In December, the board approved a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index. And then we've been doing our due diligence through January and February to get to the point where we're going to be in another slide or two. Obviously, we need to consider the Act 1 index. We also need to consider the PA state budget. I'm sure Mr. Berardi will have discussions from legislative on how that process goes throughout the coming months. Governor Wolf proposed his budget in February, second or third week of February. Deliberations are ongoing. Act 1, again, 3.4, up from 3 for the current year that we're in. And again, it's not optional. The board voted in December to stay within the Act 1 index, and 3.4% gives us about $1.375 million of new tax dollars to offset any expenditure increases if the board were to adopt a tax increase at 3.4%. So this is where we sit right now on March 1st. $56.7 million expenditure budget, up about 5%. So In the next slide, I'll talk about some of the new expenditures from comparing budget to budget. But where we're at right now is at about 3.14%. So through the diligence of our administrators, our principals, sharpening their pencils, some mitigation strategies that we've done with usage of fund balance, we're bringing that number as we sit here today at 3.14. And again, we'll talk about in another couple slides the next procedural piece that we'll do, which will be approving our preliminary budget, which will be in April, with a final adoption in June. So here are some contributing factors as it relates to expenditures. So in the month of November / December, the board voted for 2.5 full-time equivalent, or 2.5 teachers based on enrollment, 2 grade level teachers at our Pine Road Elementary School and a specialty teacher at Pine Road Elementary School. Again, dealing with increased enrollment, and this is expenditures that were not in last year's budget, that didn't evolve until those times. A factor of obviously students coming in, students returning, and students coming in as the new homes were coming online and enrolling when their homes were done. So in theory, with all the new houses at this point built out, we're hoping that we do not see that large surge of enrollment. I got some facts and figures from Mr. Cole, who he and his staff have been doing a diligent job with kindergarten registration, and those numbers are coming in trending a little bit lower than they did last year. But I can tell you we are still getting enrollments every day. A couple enrollments as the next second semester started, and as folks move in, they're certainly coming into our building. We had a couple students move in from other districts that we could not meet their needs here, so we're looking for an increase in out-of-district tuition. Special education transportation is a big number, and if you think about it, this is predominantly how we do our special education transportation with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. That is done, it lags a year. So what we're projecting next year is the transportation costs that we're incurring this year. Why the big jump? Was because last year was a reflection of 1920, where everything stopped on March 13th. So there was a large decrease in last year's budget. This is bringing it back up to where we normally were. So this, again, potentially could continue if we see more out-of-district placements, but this number, that increase is bringing it to a level where we were 2 years ago. And then again, more students moving in with needs, a net increase of 145,000, which is 7 or 8 instructional aides, or 6 or 7 instructional aides, excuse me, spread throughout all 3 schools. So almost $1 million of what I term, quote unquote, new expenditures as we compare current year budget to next year budget. And then, unfortunately, Dr. Hilda's not here, but he was able to convert my PowerPoint to a presentation that now has interesting spacing, so I will blame Dr. Hilt. But again, as this year, as the same as this year, we're planning to use $100,000 of our set-aside fund balance for PEASers and $100,000 for health care. Again, employing some of the same strategies that we did this year. The last piece that we'll talk about is the state budget. I talked about this last year as it related to the fair funding formula. Governor Wolf has tried to revamp how schools are funded, trying to get more dollars to schools in need based on large enrollment increases, based on large numbers of English language learners, of which we certainly are. as he released his budget figures for this year, he's projecting to put $1.25 billion of basic subsidy through the fair funding formula. Those numbers, again, continuing the investments in the existing districts and adding 300 to supplement districts with higher at-risk student population. So if everything would go through, we would see $1 million increase, almost $1,050,000 increase. We're projecting none of that increase right now. The increase that we are projecting in state funding is a reflection of last year's state budget. So it's an increase, but it's an increase based on what we're being funded for at current year rates. If the state would pass a budget in a timely fashion so that school districts could secure these numbers, it would be extremely advantageous. However, it would not be fiscally prudent to do such. So as a comparison, in this current year, we're receiving about $300,000 more in basic subsidy. So that's what we're including in our budget figure. But again, that's what we're receiving this year. We're projecting 0 increase for next year unless the state passes their budget. And again, the conclusion that you can draw is the state realizes that they're not funding Lower Moreland Township School District as they should. So where does that fall upon? Unfortunately, it's our local taxpayers. Once again, if the state would pass that budget in a timely fashion, we could include these numbers. It just doesn't happen. And again, this is in our basic subsidy. There's also a projected large increase with our special education subsidy. And again, there is a proposal for charter school reform, which would equalize a statewide average tuition rate for all charter schools, which would project us to save about another $135,000, all of which are in a budget proposal and typically never come to fruition. So we will keep the board posted. I know Mr. Berardi will keep us posted with his legislative increases. And here's where I forgot to change the dates. I'm sorry, but they still hold true. March through May, we'll continue to look ways to review the expenditure side, to cut expenditures, monitor the ongoing revenues. We are certainly cognizant of what's going on in the economy. We're making downward trends in some of our revenue line items that are reflective of what could potentially happen as inflation increases. However, we are not increasing a line item for interest earnings as of this time yet, as the Fed has yet to move on raising those rates. So if the Fed does start raising those rates, we'll certainly take a look at that interest line item. Again, in April, we'll look to adopt a preliminary budget, and then in June, seek approval of a final budget, and that is when we will set the tax rate and charge our tax collector with the collection of taxes. I'll certainly entertain any questions. I know this was very quickly gone through. Please know this budget has already gone through at least 20 iterations, 20 different adjustments. We're certainly monitoring everything that comes in. If we get a potential retirement, we'll certainly include that. If we have a new student who moves in with special needs, we'll include that as well. So it's a delicate process, but it's keeping in line with what we've been doing over the last 3 to 4 years of coming in at or below the Act 1 index. So I'll certainly entertain any questions if anyone has anything.
So, Mr. McGuinn, if we had pie in the sky and fair funding does come through, then we would need only have like a $300,000 increase?
Yeah, we would certainly make some strategic adjustments. We certainly would, the potential tax increase could certainly go down. Remember, that line item was just for basic subsidy. We would see another, I believe it's $175,000 of special education funding. And again, we potentially could see another $135,000 of charter school reform money. So all that combined, pie in the sky, we could pretty much bring this pretty close to zero. keeping everything else, you know, utilizing the same things that we have on the expenditure side. I don't foresee that happening. Do I foresee us getting an increase? Certainly. But it's you know, we had a discussion on the business manager level in the county, and the majority of us are keeping it at 0. Some are maybe going to increase their number by 1 or 2%, knowing that in theory they're going to get an increase. But there's so many things that can affect this. On a state level, the state has collected a lot more revenue than they thought they were going to collect, which I think surprised some state officials. However, they're also offsetting that with federal funds, which, just like a school district, are going to run out, and they don't want to put themselves, meaning the state, in a situation where they're funding continuing expenditures with money that's going to run out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before we move on, I have a quick question. I was just, I guess, a little confused as to how we left the health and safety plan, because if it's, the metrics are going to expire, what would you like to see the board do?
So a few things I need answered from the board. And number one, if there's going to be any adoption of the CDC mask recommendations. Second would be, is there any authorization to adopt the CDC recommendations as it relates to transportation? And is there any authorization for the district for changes to the recommended contact tracing from the Montgomery County Office of Public Health? If nothing has changed, we continue with the contact tracing that we're doing now. Buses, students would still be required to wear masks on buses, and we're in a recommended situation based on our health and safety plan through the 15th of March. However, there are no further metrics that will measure beyond, no more further metrics to measure that, other than what came out today. So those three things are at the board's discretion. You can take a number of different things. You can authorize me to move forward if the board's in majority or concession to do that, and you can ratify it at later times. You can take some to move forward with and ratify later. You can not do anything. It's at your will.
Well, Camille, I don't know if that's something you want to address.
Well, if the metrics are going away, I think we have to address that. There's no other way that we have anything, and do we need some kind of metric, or are we going, we can't do what we're doing presently if we don't have that metric.
Again, as a board, my recommendation to you would be to adopt the CDC mask recommendations. How the language, and you want with the language, because that's not part of their recommendations, would have to be parsed out if that's something you want in a high category, and would have to be changed with regard to that. But I would certainly suggest you move forward with adopting the CDC mask recommendations right now, and because there is no other alternative, unless you want to come up with some other process with regard to masks.
I would suggest that we move to adapt our current health and safety plan to model the CDC's updated guidelines, altering the metrics from the numbers that we're not going to have anymore from their new metrics. Obviously, the wording has to be parsed out, you know, to...
Yeah. So What I need tonight is authorization to go ahead from the board to do that. If you're in enough unison to move to that, then you can ratify that at your legislative meeting in 2 weeks. I don't anticipate, we're right now in a mask recommended, although, it goes to the 15th based on that, so it still covers us in terms if you had a metric, you still have a metric that lands you up until that day of that, so you could stay in where you are now and just simply take a vote then, or you could shift to it now and ratify it at that point later. To be honest with you, I don't necessarily think it really moves anything any other way. It's recommended now either way in the CDC. I don't imagine our county moving and shifting in the next couple of weeks any significant way, maybe actually into low.
Perhaps with the notion of not voting for that specific change without public comment, we note that we plan to make that change, knowing that we're covered right now with the plan as it is.
I think what I can do with that is I can, in the week leading up to our next legislative meeting, I can announce that the board will consider the adoption of the CDC mask requirements and just put people on notice of that. And I think we are covered right now based on the current metrics that you used, at least up until the 15th. So, and it'll take you up to the meeting itself.
I thought it was lasting for 6 days.
Excuse
I
me?
thought the metrics were only there for 6 days.
The 2 consecutive weeks
it's still
metrics
gonna
that
go on.
the old metrics allow us in the system that was built to remain mask recommended through the 15th based on those current metrics. So I think that's what I would suggest to you is maybe you don't necessarily do anything with the CDC and you can do that at a voting meeting. I don't know that you have any other options. And if the board wants the language to look any different than the CDC recommendations itself, that could be brought up, that could be amended during the motion, and could be handled in that way, shape, or form. I do need some clarification on the buses. The order has been removed. There's no requirement. Our health and safety plan ties us to the order. So I asked for the cooperation of the community to hold on with your masks yesterday and today, knowing that we'd come to a meeting, and if the board had any indication as to what it wants to do with regard to school transportation and masking.
Are there any thoughts?
As much as I would say, what's the difference if we just hold off till the next meeting, the masking on the busing is probably going to be the biggest issue because as much as I really don't care what other districts do, I've always said that, we're probably the last district right now that hasn't removed that from the busing. So I think after today, you're going to have a hard time. And again, then you're going to start putting it into the hands of these drivers. They're going to start getting a lot of kids coming on the bus without masking. So I don't want to put anybody in a situation where they're going to have to spend most of their time fighting parents or kids to put a mask on. So if we're going to adopt the CDC guidelines, I would at least say we adopt that part now. I'm all for adopting all of it now because at this point, the CDC, Montgomery County Office of Public Health, and CHOP basically are all aligned. So I don't know what other recommendations or guidelines we're going to be looking for between now and the next meeting. I mean, we've always taken our guidance for the most part from those three organizations. So I don't know what we're going to wait for as far as guidance. So, I mean, that's the guidance that's moving forward. If that's what we're going to adopt, I don't see why we wouldn't adopt all of it tonight unless somebody has some other opinion.
Mrs. Natter? Did you want to say something?
I would just question if we're already having a shortage of bus drivers and we're having trouble covering our routes now, are we going to be able to handle it if bus drivers are out sick?
I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have the answer to that. I think there's so many ifs we can talk about, and I think we have to just cross bridges as we get to there. You know, we can't sit there and think that this is going to cause more of a shortage of bus drivers.
Dr. David Heiser, has there been any concern from the busing company itself with regards to whatever the policy is and their driver policy?
Not, you know, there's been instances of some struggles here and there, but they've worked through it for them.
Do they have a driver masking policy that they have either
They
maintained or eliminated?
They follow our policy right now. So when we were, and actually they asked us when we shifted to mask recommended last week, and we said yes, by order, needs to stay on, remain on until a determination is made by the board.
So as far as you know, they would continue to follow our recommendations?
They would follow us. They would follow our plan.
Since this policy just changed on Friday, has anybody actually spoken to the bus drivers since then to see how they feel about it?
Mark?
Yes, I have. Actually, the branch manager called me, and the drivers were asking if they still have to wear a mask. And again, I deferred to Dr. David Heiser's guidance that he needed a chance to talk to the school board about that. Additionally, as Dr. David Heiser mentioned, as it relates to students, if this board decides to continue to have the desire to have students wear masks on the bus, I will tell you the same as Dr. David Heiser will tell you, that there will be some students who do not. And it is not going to be the opinion of myself, who supervises transportation, to have our drivers be the masked police. They need to keep their eyes and ears on the road and on student management of what's going on in the bus and not policing the masks. So I foresee the same types of things as Dr. David Heiser was describing happening in a classroom, happening on a bus. So while we can certainly say, you know, we're requiring to wear a mask, it will make the bus driver's job virtually impossible to administrate that as he or she is driving a bus on the road.
I mean, I guess I'll play devil's advocate a little further. I mean, will we lose any bus drivers who maybe don't want to have to wear a mask, go drive for a neighboring school district because most of them have dropped it? I don't know. Maybe it hurts us that way, where they just say, you know what, I don't have to deal with 10,000 screaming kids. I'm going to go drive for, you know, Upper Dublin or whatever district has already adopted it. So
I will just add one thing. I believe the sense that I get from the school bus drivers is that if he or she desires to wear a mask, he or she will continue to wear a mask. But if given an option and they do not have to wear a mask, some drivers may not wear a mask.
I think it's difficult to follow the mandate if we no longer have a mandate. So unless the board's willing to come up with a different policy, I think we have no other choice because we have followed the mandate, but the mandate has expired. So unless we come up with our own policy, we follow the guidelines from the CDC according to the buses. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. Once the federal mandate expired, the bus drivers follow our health and safety plan. They follow just like everyone else. So I don't see how we mandate.
Unless we came up with our own policy.
Yeah, unless we, right.
That's what I'm saying, you'd have to develop one.
Right, and
So the
not
CDC
what I want to do.
federal mandate does allow that school systems at their discretion may choose to ask for masks to be required. I think we have to remember here, we're in a situation where cases are low. We all know that. Cases are extremely low. We're going to be in low, if not already. I think we have to be forward-thinking as well in case we get back up high. In those situations, masking on buses makes sense. What if we lose drivers to COVID? I mean, I think we have to reframe our discussion here because we're all understanding right now that we are in low. And cases are thankfully few and far between. But that potentially may not always be the case.
I'll add that I agree with Mr. Berardi that we should follow CDC guidelines. I think that that's something that we should have continued to do, and I would encourage us to try to be consistent in policies that do follow those guidelines. And I don't have a problem going forward with doing that now and removing that mandate, certainly on the buses, based on those guidelines. I do think that although, as Mr. Berardi said, it won't make a difference in the policy, it just feels to me better, since we are covered with the current policy, to provide opportunity for public comment before we vote on changing the complete health and safety plan.
So is your recommendation to have some time to wait to discuss that, or to wait till the next meeting? Is that what you're asking?
As far as the bus issue goes, I think that it's logical to follow the guidelines, and we need to have something in place. We can't just leave it out there as well, it's not really a rule, but we want you to do it anyway. I think we should establish whatever the board decides to establish with regards to the buses. I think that, as Dr. David Heiser, and as we discussed earlier, I think that we should try to come up with amended wording for the health and safety plan that matches the current guidelines and changes the metrics, and that particular part is something we should postpone voting on till the next meeting.
So you're saying go forward with the buses now, or to wait for the buses?
I think we're obligated to come up with some rule for the buses now, since we don't have a rule. Our rule for the health and safety plan will remain in place for the next 2 weeks roughly. So we're not left without a specific guideline. With the busing, we currently essentially are left without a specific guideline. So that part, I think, probably needs to be addressed in some, we need to, I think, specify, I mean, it's not for me to decide, right, for the board to vote to say.
I think the question is, do we adopt the CDC according to the buses, or do we come up with something else? Is that what you're asking? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I'm simply saying we should come up with a guideline for the buses now, and we should look to amend the health and safety plan at the next meeting to meet the change in metrics. So I think tonight we do need to establish some answer with regards to busing.
The buses. Mr. Geiger?
No, I was just going to say, well, I agree with you, Dr. Butler. I would say, what would maybe, are we going to have a roll call for that? Should we have the roll call? Because
This is not a vote. I need to see that there's a general majority here.
Okay.
So that it could be ratified. You can give me authorization to go ahead and take action.
Right.
A few weeks ago, you gave me authorization for the Test to Stay program, Mask to Stay program, and then you ratified it at a following legislative meeting. This is similar to that, where we need to have some clarity with regard to some of these things.
Okay.
What makes sense to me is that you follow whatever you're following with the CDC mask recommendations, you're going to follow with the buses. They're going to be in a complete alignment. So if you're requiring in high, you're going to require in buses when you're in high. If you're in moderate and it's not required, you're doing it that way.
Right.
With regard to that. So I think this all centers on a word that's going to be in the high category. Is it recommend or is it require?
Right.
And that's going to be for buses, and that's going to be for your buildings. I think that's the only component to that. I don't think anybody's doubting what it is, and the authority that you have as a board is again your authority to take guidance and make it as you wish in your own community to be able to do.
So what we authorized tonight would basically be a 2-week patch, just to get us.
Well, it
to
would be that it
public
needs a
session.
majority that you're going to ratify what you're giving. It's not giving me that tonight and then arbitrarily just changing your minds, and we're in 2 weeks, we're shifting guidance again. This is that we're leaving here tonight with the understanding that you're going to ratify that at a voting session. If you're uncomfortable with that notion, then I don't think the board should move forward with giving me authority to do something and then not voting it through at a legislative meeting.
Well, if we say tonight that the students don't have to wear a mask on the bus tomorrow, that doesn't mean that they never have to wear a mask on the bus again, I guess is my question, is my point.
No,
So-
it's with a clearer understanding that you're giving authorization to tie it like I suggested. Now, what, that key word that I think is there can be parsed out at a different time with regard to that and voted on, but that you're tying the busing, you're tying the masking, you're tying it to the CDC recommendations as they exist. What still needs to be parsed out is that one word of what's going to be required or recommended in high. If you give me that authorization, I can move forward and apply those things for the next couple of weeks. Masking, it won't change, it's going to still be the same as we have right now, which is just in a recommended form. The busing, it will. And then at that meeting, what will need to be determined is what action you're taking on the true language of it.
Well, if the metrics are good for we're good for 2 weeks with the present one. So are we going with the present one, or are we going with the new metrics?
I think what the suggestion is that we ratify, that you give authority for the newest CDC recommendations. The
So-
low, medium, and high categories. We're currently in the medium. We're tying our busing and we're tying our masking to those. What will have to be determined at the legislative meeting will be a determination on what word you want to use in the high.
So if we tie it to the high, it's still recommended until we say that at the next meeting?
I don't think you're going to get to the high between now and then.
Yeah, that's something that I don't think can necessarily be.
Well, I'm just saying, they're saying that it's always going to be recommended, correct? Or is it ever going to be required?
Well, I think that's what I'm suggesting,
we
that
require-
whatever
we
you
were saying that.
determine to be your scale has to be applied evenly across your buildings and your
No, I
buses.
understand that. I'm just saying, the CDC, when they get to high, is still saying recommended or required.
That they are saying recommended.
So it's always going to be recommended.
The
CDC
board,
doesn't
well,
make
that,
According to
that will be something that has to be dealt with at the legislative meeting.
Okay.
I
The
think we
CDC
can-
doesn't make requirements, they
Right.
make recommendations, so they've never made
But I'm
requirements.
saying, according to them, it's always going to be recommended as opposed to.
They are only ever going to say recommended,
Okay, that was my
as they've
question.
always said.
Right, okay,
The CDC doesn't have the authority
right.
to make a law,
right,
so they can only recommend.
right. And
But
that was
it's
my
up to the
question. It's always going to be
district.
recommended, whether it's moderate or it's high, medium or
Okay,
high.
so let me get this straight then. What I will do is move for, you're authorizing me, is there a majority here that authorizes me to move forward with moving our buses to mask optional in our buses, we're going to apply the CDC recommendations as they are now.
I think it makes the most sense to say that the bus masking guidelines match the health and safety plan guidelines for the building.
Correct. Yep. And currently, we're aligning those to CDC.
Can we be rather emphatic and say that we are indeed matching the guidelines of the federal government, as the doctor said, but we strongly urge people to wear masks in the buses?
We will tie our language to the exact language of the CDC.
That's rather
That's what they have,
rather weak.
Well, again, there's 9 members on this board, so for me to take everybody's words into how I communicate that would probably go in opposite directions and not make much sense. So I'm suggesting that any language we use, we tie it to what it is, your measurement scale is being used, and that right now, you're using the CDC, the newest CDC guidance.
Which is simply to recommend.
and then we allow parents to determine that for the children
And
because of the.
if some of us believe that
Then the
recommend
legislative
is-
meeting in 2 weeks is when that action can be taken. If anybody wants to amend the motions to include any language changes regarding those.
Okay.
But this takes us forward right now. Is everyone in agreement? Everyone? Alan? Dr. Cohen?
Okay. We okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes.
The third item would be the contact tracing. And what was proposed tonight and recommended by the county is 2 buckets. One with a single case, which has been all of our cases to date across 2 years, in which we would do a, can't think of the word, but surveillance messaging and such, depending on the point of contact exposure. And the other would be if we have 3 or more, to which we would enact our what we currently are doing with contact tracing.
I think it makes sense to follow the county recommendations.
Okay.
Just a question,
I agree.
did they get into household exposure at all?
No, that's gone in terms of it, right?
It's moving from like a 20-day quarantine
Oh,
to
yeah.
nothing.
They've moved, right. They've moved off that. The exclusion chart for that, Cheryl, is still, what's household exposure exclusion chart? And if they're vaccinated, they can come in, can you read that exclusion chart on that again? It's been so long. We haven't had one of those in such a long time.
While she's pulling that up, if you notice, the metrics for the CDC go to a 7-day rolling, right? Did I see that correctly?
The county suggests that they'll be updating every Friday.
So I think you're going to see those numbers coming on, falling off rather quickly than the 14-day that they used to use.
Can I just clarify for the board? I think we're in agreement with the exception of the category high and the word required and recommended. Is that just something that we'll discuss next time? Are we in agreement with that?
Yep,
But I think we're in agreement with the other things, so we're making progress as a board. We just have to work on that one definition, correct? Okay, thank you.
So will you then revise the plan, and then we'll just discuss that word at the next meeting?
Yeah, we'll bring a revised health and safety plan, probably have a draft that will be struck and added to and so
Okay.
forth, so that you can see that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
with
think it would be
regard to-
irresponsible to continue to use the current metrics that are no longer going to exist, so moving
Correct.
forward, yeah.
Cheryl?
Yep. So the chart says that those who are household contact and who have not been boosted, have received a booster if they're over 18 or received a series of vaccination shots if they're 5 to 17 years old. They're supposed to quarantine for 5 days after last exposure. Testing is recommended on day 5, and mask worn around others days
Right.
6 through 10.
That's the current policy, right?
That's correct. That's the MICO policy. Yep.
So that would continue under the new plan?
That still continues, yeah.
Okay.
So we have consensus on the contact tracing, that would be ratified? Okay, so just to be clear, you gave me authority to move forward with communicating that the board at its next legislative meeting will be ratifying the recommendation to follow the CDC mask recommendations, which will all additionally apply on buses. A determination will follow at that legislative meeting to determine the high category and that of the language of require versus recommend. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the contact changes to the contact tracing will move forward as suggested as recommended by the Montgomery County Office of Public Health. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
I just have one more question. I don't want to keep dragging this out, but just moving forward, do we have to discuss the issue of visitors in the building now or when we revise the health and safety plan?
Will need to be addressed. Again, that's something that I think when the health and safety plan, it'll need to be, well, I need to know, actually, in order for me to bring some sort of draft to you that has the recommendation you want with regard to visitors in the building. And what is a visitor? Is a visitor somebody that comes to an event inside an auditorium? Is a visitor somebody that comes delivering goods and services to the building? Is it somebody that's working in the building? Is it a parent that comes in for a meeting with a teacher or a counselor? Is it a homeroom parent that's in the building for 3-4 hours? Is it, I mean, it's almost nauseating to think about.
Yep.
And I think for me to help our administration administrate a lot of these things, we need a clear pathway to it. The pathway we've been utilizing right now to date, since we've had masks only recommended for the past week, has been a visitor is somebody that comes to the building if they are not an employee, a full-time employee that just comes temporarily during the day while the buildings are occupied. However, for events that are after school, we don't consider them to be visitors to the building, and that they're kind of part of the event as the spectator, as being whatever. Our outside organizations as HVAA, as they, same thing, that they apply to the mask recommendation that we have, and that they act in a similar fashion. The visitors that we've really declared, and the focus has been on while our buildings are fully occupied with students and visitors too.
I guess
As you
it
can
would-
tell, it gets pretty complicated, and it really shouldn't be, and it needs to be pretty simple.
I guess it would depend on the word that we choose as required or recommended.
Well, I think that moving forward, we need to, again, the CDC guidelines currently, based on the metrics that they've come up with, would not require visitors to wear a mask inside or a person to wear a mask inside any building. So it would only make sense that we adopt that as well. Now, we're not talking about high. If we're in high, that's something else that we can revisit, that wording again. But if we're going to follow the guidance in one area, we should follow it in the other areas as well.
I would agree. I think it needs to be very clear, similar to the way the buses and the buildings are with following the CDC, and it makes it just so much cleaner.
I think the difference was that our old policy was tied to the metrics for Lower Moreland. And then we were concerned if visitors are coming from other places, do we want them to be in a mask? Now that the new policy is tied to the county as a whole, it doesn't make much of a difference whether you're a visitor or you're from Lower Moreland. So I would agree that the policy for visitors should be the same as the policy for everybody else in the building.
And I would agree with that, too.
Are we okay with that as a board? And that could also be instituted inside the draft when I bring it to you in 2 weeks, but we can incorporate that now and communicate that now. Okay. All right. I think that's everything with regard to health and safety. Mrs. Drennan?
Over here. I'm stealth-like, I don't know what to tell you. For tonight's update, I just took a page out of the curriculum renewal playbook to give you an update of the process and where we are. The next step in our process is to provide surveys to stakeholders. We typically survey 4 groups: students, teachers, parents and guardians, and alumni. The questions this year are specific not only to things related to the discipline itself and what is learned, how it's learned, that kind of thing, but we've added this year some questions that also speak to inclusivity and a feeling of respect in the classroom, an understanding of people's needs, students' needs based on their backgrounds and learning styles and learning needs. So the surveys are more robust than they have been in the past. The parent and guardian surveys will be going out by way of the superintendent's newsletter and will be communicated again through the buildings or by the buildings. The next thing we have on tap is a materials pilot for science. This is a really exciting part of the process. 2 of the buildings have determined that in order to meet the new requirements and standards that are being adopted by the state of Pennsylvania, they will require some new materials in order to do that. Pine Road selected a program that was aligned with the next generation science standards in the last renewal. So they're comfortable with that program and will continue to work on building their curriculum around the new standards, but their materials and resources serve them well, and we don't have a need to change. So for the middle school and the high school, when a pilot occurs, it is a short-term time where people will be interacting with new materials, and data will be collected, observational as well as quantifiable when it comes to assessments. Teachers who participate in the pilot get to craft a unit or lessons around a specific concept. Some of the classes will continue to use our current resources so a comparison can be made about the quality of the resource. And prior to beginning any pilot, teachers receive professional development so that they know how to use the materials appropriately and interact with the online platforms. So both the middle school and the high school will go through this process. They will then make a recommendation for selection of a program or a textbook or additional resources. And then that recommendation will be brought to you for your approval for adoption. So at the 6 through 8 level, they will be comparing HMH's Science Dimensions with McGraw-Hill's Inspire Science, and we'll have pilot teachers in grades 6, 7, and 8. And at the high school, the disciplines who are attempting to find a new resource are biology, chemistry, physics, and 9th grade freshman chemistry and physics class. We are actually receiving a few additional materials right now, so this list may change. For anybody who's interested in following the curriculum renewal process, on my website there are updates to this. So the first thing you'll see listed there will be all of the texts that were reviewed for possible pilot, and then an update of the texts that have been selected for the pilot. So right now, these are the identified ones. We did ask for another copy of something in physics this week, so there may be a shift there, but we anticipate that this is the group that will pilot. And the presentation of the needs assessment will come to you in the May work session. So you'll see updates in May for science, mathematics, library and technology, and world language all in one. It'll be a little more robust than in some other years. Typically it's only 2 areas, but because of the impact of the last 2 years, and especially the way that things ran last year, it was difficult to do curriculum committee work. And we're back in the swing of things this year and finding much success.
Mrs. Jen, I have a question concerning the science. Is it science, 7th grade has the PSSAs?
8th grade.
Oh, 8th grade. Will you be using the PSSAs as a data point to compare?
In the needs assessment process, we did use PSSA data as part of the kind of information that informed our need to find a new resource. So yes, it has been considered. The last data point that we feel is robust enough and authentic enough to really reference, however, is 2019. So it's not very current data, but it's the last data point that was an uninterrupted and typical school year.
So you'll be able to compare the older program to the new pilot, if you look at it that way. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what were the main weaknesses? Did you find anything in one of the PSSA years compared to that we needed to adopt a new program? Like, where did you see the weaknesses?
The standards are changing. So Pennsylvania is adopting new standards for science and technology. And the integration of technology and ecology content topics are now needing to be cross-cutting rather than standalone concepts. And so textbooks that are not necessarily NGSS aligned would be difficult to utilize because you're trying to accomplish that in a much different presentation, and also the level of application and an interaction with the content for students is very different. There's more independence, more inquiry than a typical traditional program has had.
Did you find any weaknesses with the older program? I know you're saying that you're looking at the new standards, but was there ever an issue, like year after year, was there anything that the district fell short in any area in that particular pilot?
So I don't know that it was the resource itself, but there were, over time, we did see trends in different topics that students, like were not our highest topic on the PSSA, if that's what you're getting at. And sometimes that would change. So we would move units in different grade levels or time of year when those trends were seen. So we've tried to make adjustments to that over time. Right now, I can't name any of those with specificity for you. But one of the things with the science PSSA that's very different than the math and the ELA is it's cumulative over a number of years. So you have to be sort of strategic where you give refreshers on topics if they were covered in 5th grade, let's say, and then they're eligible content for the 8th grade PSSA. That's definitely a challenge that we continue to look at and try and overcome.
So one more question. Is there any coordination between the math and the science when they're taught to see that, you know, that would lessen the gaps that you're seeing? And it's kind of like you get more bang for your buck when you integrate. Have you seen that?
Yeah, 6th grade in particular has a couple of units that go together hand in hand with science and math. And then 7th and 8th grade also do project-based learning projects that include science and math in them too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dren.
Sure.
Mrs. Gaudo.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to give the board and the school community an update on an effort that the Human Resources Office is currently working on. So that would be the CAPS clearances. How do I get this? Yeah. Thanks. Oh, thank you. We are working in conjunction with Tim Moxie, the Lower Mullen High School teacher who oversees the CAPS graduation project for seniors. And during CAPS, which takes place during the month of May, seniors go out into the community to intern with businesses and organizations to get a glimpse of future career paths. Popular CAPS sites include Holy Redeemer Hospital, Briar Bush Nature Center, and local engineering and accounting firms. So the Human Resources Office works with these sites selected by the students to obtain volunteer clearances on the mentors. So these clearances include the Pennsylvania State Police check, the Pennsylvania Child Abuse check, and a disclosure form if they have lived continuously in Pennsylvania for the last 10 years, or an FBI fingerprint check if not. When we explain how these clearances are important to protect the safety of our students, the mentors are usually very cooperative, very happy to help us out. We walk them through the process of obtaining the clearances so it doesn't appear too daunting to them. And I would, going on to PR update, I would like to give the board an update on some public relations happenings. So the Locks of Love event, which is Pictures There, it was held on this past President's Day, and it was held at Salon La Vogue, which is owned by Ms. Dana Shane, a longtime partner with Pine Road Elementary, in holding the Locks of Love event. The Locks of Love event is organized by Ms. Ellen Chucky, a Pine Road teacher, who does a fabulous job, and students, teachers, and parents were invited to have their hair cut and donated to the Locks of Love organization that provides custom wigs for financially disadvantaged children with hair loss due to a medical condition. This salon styles a person's hair with a beautiful new haircut for free after the donation is made. And as you see there, we had news cameras from NBC 10, CBS, ABC, and Fox 29 all covered the event in response to a press release that I sent out. Going on to the Out of Darkness Suicide Prevention Walk, as Ms. Maura Quinn talked about earlier. We're supporting that effort through the superintendent's newsletter. The website has a highlight of it. We're also sending out, getting people excited about it through social media, and we'll send out press releases to try to get some coverage the day of the event, so April 9th. That's my update. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Go.
I just wanted to provide a brief update on the Pennsylvania Alternative System of Assessment, otherwise known as PASA. PASA is the alternative version of the PSSA, and it is given right around the same time as PSSA every year. This year, the testing window is March 14th through May 20th. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be administering the assessment in grades 3 through 8 and 11 in English, language arts, and math, as well as science in grades 4, 8, and 11. We have 18 students taking it this year. There are strict guidelines from the state on how many students can take the test and score proficient. That would be 1% of the total tested population, so 1% of the total population of students in grades 3 through 8 and 11. Typically, we are over that 1% threshold by 1 or 2 students each year, maybe 1.5 students. Most districts are over the threshold for any number of reasons. That is why there's a form that you submit to the state explaining why, and just indicating that we would be over the threshold. So we have 5 teachers trained as test administrators. We typically use 4 of those teachers. We kind of have 1 on standby, and it is really intended for students with the most severe cognitive disabilities. And as I said, we'll be starting that in a couple weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Yardell. Gabe, and you're going to run point for Dr. Hilt?
Yes, he has a video set up for that.
Thank you, Dr. David Heiser. Good evening, everyone. And a special thank you to Jay Blandon and Gabe Perez for your assistance with the technology aspects of the meeting this evening. My first update relates to the device repairs for this school year. As you can see by looking at the numbers, high school repairs, Murray Avenue repairs, and Pine Road repairs continue to be trending in the right direction. And this is thanks to students taking care of their devices. And in the event that a device does need to be repaired, our tech team is doing a phenomenal job getting those devices repaired quickly and back into the hands of students. My second update relates to Pine Road Proud Pillar Assemblies. Pine Road Proud Pillar Assemblies are happening virtually this year with a school-wide Google Meet to recognize outstanding students and to build community. This month, in addition to recognizing responsible students in the building, Mrs. McMullen challenged students with the following prompt. How can we be responsible for including others at Pine Road? Students completed a follow-up activity to explore this idea in their classrooms after the virtual assembly. And if you're not familiar with the Pine Road Pledge, I will recite it for you now. I pledge to try each day in my work and in my play to be respectful, responsible, honest, and kind. I am Pine Road proud. My third and final update for this evening is the Technology Spotlight on Pine Road STEM Innovation Lab. I want to thank Carly Sugden and Julie Dunphy for their efforts to put the March 2022 Tech Tidbit video together. In this video, first graders worked on a floating and sinking challenge in the Pine Road STEM Innovation Lab with Mrs. Krupa and Mrs. Chunky. First, they explored different materials to see if they would sink or float. Students were then challenged to help a gingerbread person cross the river after listening to a story. Once they designed their solution in teams, students tested them out to see if they could hold the weight of the gingerbread person. Let's check out this month's Tech Tidbit to see some of their solutions and results.
Oh, we're sinking. That's, we're under. Yep.
Go ahead, honey. Put that one in. Put the big one in. It worked. Woo, it worked. Let's see how we do it. All right. Let's put all of it inside. Let's see.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and I also hope that you enjoy the rest of the work session. Have a nice evening.
Okay, that moves us down to personnel. Mrs. Gaudo,
Yes.
those items, please.
Yes, we have in section 1A, two personnel motions. One is a health sabbatical request for Maureen Sabilar, a first grade teacher at Pine Road, for this semester from January 25th to June 14th. We were waiting for her physician to complete the paperwork. That's why it's being asked for retroactively. She's currently on leave. And then mentor pay for Erin Thorpe, who's mentoring Ms. Sabilar's substitute, Brittany Cratch, at a rate of a stipend of $200.
Any questions for Mrs. Gaudo? Okay, there are no athletic or non-athletic items to date. I would imagine that may change within the next 2 weeks, so we'll bring those updates to you if there are any at the legislative meeting. Professional meetings, Mrs. Drennan?
There are a number of professional meetings here for your consideration. The majority of these remain virtual at this point, and the last one on the list, which is a request by Sharon O'Shea, we just learned has been canceled, so we will remove that prior to the board meeting.
Thank you. Under Building and Grounds, we have one application, that is St. Albert's for their track and field competitions. You can see that application listed there.
And Dr. David Heiser, there's a fee assessed of $700. That's a traditional fee. They've utilized the track for a number of years, obviously before COVID-19.
Any questions on the payable checklist? Mr. Giordano, handle the agreement.
Yes, we have a request for approval of an agreement between the district and the parents of student number, well, listed on the agreement. If we click on that. This is simply a change from an IEP placement to an agreement with the parents. It is agreed upon by district and parents that the school is the proper placement for the student, but there is some difficulty in implementing an IEP properly at the placement. So the plan was for the IEP team for the student to stay there next year. Student would still stay there next year. We would just switch from an IEP to an agreement.
Any questions? Okay, under school board, there are two extracurricular activities listed there that are making application for their first year. The Croquet Club and Gift of Life Club. We are recommending to the board for their approval for a year one status. And Mrs. Gaudo, you have the draft board policy 610.
Yes. So we made a proposed revision to policy 610, which is the purchases subject to bid quotation. So it gives some background. The Pennsylvania Bulletin, published by the Department of Labor and Industry annually, provides updated minimum and maximum amounts for competitive bidding. It's based on the CPI, Consumer Price Index. So this is the first reading of this policy, where we change the minimum and maximum amounts. The board will have the second reading at the April board meeting, and then they will approve it, if they're so choose. So for the current policy that's in place, the minimum amount was $10,900, and the revised policy is $11,800 is the minimum. The maximum is currently $20,100 in the current policy. The revised policy is $21,900.
Okay.
What did you say the current max value is? Is it the same?
21,900?
So that's not changing?
No, it's currently 20,100.
20,000.
Yeah, yep.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mayfield, do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Baker, I'll defer to you if there's any discussion.
Is there anything anyone would like to discuss? No? Anyone? Okay. If there are nothing to discuss, the meeting is adjourned. So can we just debrief after everyone leaves?